Greetings, fellow fans. You're tuned into God of Fiction, presenting to you today, what if Gringotts found 100 illegal blocks on Harry's core and arrested Dumbledore at the sorting feast? Show some love by liking and subscribing. Enjoy the story ahead. Chapter 1, The Vault Below. The cart ride alone should have killed him. Harry gripped the edge of the rattling iron cart as it plunged through darkness, the air screaming past his ears, his stomach somewhere 3 turns back. Hagrid had gone green about 6 seconds in and hadn't improved since. The goblin driving, Griphook, he'd said, with a voice like gravel scraped over glass, seemed to be enjoying himself, though it was hard to tell with goblins. The cart banked hard left and Harry's shoulder slammed into the side. He didn't care. He was grinning. This was magic. Real magic. Not the weird things that happened around him at the Dursleys, not Hagrid bending a shotgun barrel or giving Dudley a pig's tail. This was a world, underground rails and torchlight and something ancient humming in the stone walls around them, and Harry could feel it, a low vibration in his chest like standing too close to a bass speaker, except it didn't hurt. It felt like recognition. The cart screeched to a halt. Vault 687, Griphook announced. He hopped out with the ease of someone who'd done this 10,000 times and held up the lantern. Key, please. Hagrid fumbled through his enormous coat, pulling out dog biscuits, a ball of twine, something that might have been a dead mouse, and finally produced a tiny golden key. Griphook took it, examined it with an expression that suggested he found it barely adequate, and pressed it into the vault door. The door dissolved. Harry stepped forward and his breath caught. Gold. Silver. Bronze. Piles of coins glinting in the lantern light, heaped carelessly like someone had shoveled them in and walked away. Which, he supposed, was exactly what had happened. His parents had left him this. His parents, who he'd been told were unemployed drunks who died in a car crash. His parents, who were wizards, who'd fought a dark lord, who'd died protecting him. He stared at the gold and felt something hot press behind his eyes. Right then, Hagrid said from behind him, voice thick. Your mum and dad left ya a fair bit, Harry. Should be enough to see ya through school, at least. At least, Griphook echoed, and something in the goblin's tone made Harry glance at him. Griphook was watching Harry with an expression Harry couldn't read, dark eyes sharp and still, the lantern throwing strange shadows across his angular face. Harry grabbed a handful of galleons, not really knowing how much was enough, and stuffed them into the pouch Hagrid handed him. He turned to go. Mr. Potter. Harry stopped. Griphook was standing very still, one long finger tapping against the lantern handle. As a first-time visitor to Gringotts claiming access to a family vault, standard inheritance protocols require a brief verification meeting with your account manager. Griphook paused. It will not take long. Hagrid frowned. No one said nothing about that. Dumbledore just said take Harry to his vault and, then, Dumbledore, Griphook said, does not set Gringotts policy. The silence that followed was the kind that had edges. Hagrid shifted his weight, the cart creaking under him. Well, I suppose, but I've got another errand, Griphook, fair Dumbledore, Vault 700 and, we can attend to both matters simultaneously. I will escort Mr. Potter to the inheritance office while another associate handles your retrieval. Griphook smiled, which involved a lot of teeth and very little warmth. Efficiency, Mr. Hagrid. It is rather our specialty. Harry looked between them. Hagrid was clearly uncomfortable, but Griphook had the immovable certainty of someone standing on solid procedural ground, and Hagrid, for all his size, was not the sort of man who argued with procedures. You'll be all right, Harry? Hagrid asked. I'll be fine, Harry said. He didn't know why he was so sure of that, but he was. They separated at the next junction. Hagrid's cart went thundering off into darkness. Harry heard the big man groan as it dropped, and Griphook led Harry down a side corridor that was quieter, older. The stone here was darker, and the torches burned a different color. Pale blue. Almost cold. Mr. Potter, Griphook said as they walked, how much do you know about your family's relationship with Gringotts? Nothing, Harry said. I didn't know I was a wizard until yesterday. Griphook stopped walking. He turned and looked up at Harry. Goblins were short, barely reaching Harry's chest, but Griphook's stare had a weight to it that made height irrelevant. You were raised in the Muggle world. With my aunt and uncle. They didn't tell me anything. And no representative of the wizarding world contacted you before, Mr. Hagrid? No. Griphook's jaw tightened. Something moved behind his eyes, not surprise, exactly. More like a suspicion being confirmed. He turned and kept walking, faster now. This way, Mr. Potter. They passed through a door that Harry could have sworn wasn't there a second ago and into a corridor lined with portraits, not of wizards, but of goblins, ancient ones in armor and ceremonial dress, their painted eyes tracking Harry with open curiosity. Through another door, this one heavy iron with runes carved into its surface, and into a waiting room that was surprisingly comfortable. Leather chairs, warm lighting, a table with tea that steamed gently. Wait here, Griphook said. Senior Account Manager Ragnarok will be with you shortly. He paused at the door. Mr. Potter, whatever happens in this meeting, know that Gringotts has served House Potter for 11 centuries. We take that obligation seriously. He left before Harry could ask what that meant. Harry sat down. He poured himself tea because it was there and because the Dursleys had never let him have any, and it felt like the sort of small rebellion that mattered. The cup was warm in his hands. The tea was strong and slightly bitter and tasted like nothing he'd ever had. The door opened. The goblin who entered was nothing like Griphook. Where Griphook was lean and sharp, this goblin was broad, thick-necked, with hands like shovels and a face that looked like it had been carved from the same stone as the walls. He wore a dark suit rather than the Gringotts uniform, with a heavy gold chain across his chest and rings on every finger. His eyes were black and absolutely still, like deep water. Harry James Potter, the goblin said. Not a question. Yes, sir. The goblin's eyebrows rose a fraction. Sir. I cannot recall the last time a wizard said that to me in this building. He settled into the chair across from Harry and set a leather folder on the table between them. I am Ragnarok, Senior Account Manager for the most ancient and noble House of Potter. I have held this position for 47 years. I served your grandfather Fleamont, your father James, and now, it appears, you. It's good to meet you, Harry said, and meant it, because he was 11 and still young enough for simple honesty and because there was something about Ragnarok that felt solid and real in a way very few things in Harry's life ever had. Ragnarok studied him. Then he opened the leather folder. Mr. Potter, I will be direct with you. Goblins do not waste words on pleasantries or soften unpleasant truths. What I am about to tell you will be difficult to hear, and I will not pretend otherwise. He folded his hands. When you entered Gringotts today, you passed through our main detection wards. These wards are keyed to identify threats, dark artifacts, concealed weapons, hostile enchantments. He paused. They also identify magical anomalies on the person of any being who passes through our doors. Harry set his tea down. Anomalies? Your scan, Mr. Potter, triggered a level 9 alert. We have not had a level 9 alert in this bank since 1746. Ragnarok's voice was perfectly controlled, but something in it had hardened. I need your permission to perform a detailed diagnostic on your magical core. I will explain what that means. A team of our healers will use goblin diagnostic magic, not wizard magic, which is relevant for reasons I will clarify, to examine the state of your innate magic. It is painless. It takes approximately 10 minutes. And based on what our wards detected, I strongly advise you to consent. Harry's mouth was dry. What did your wards detect? Bindings, Ragnarok said. On you. On your magic. Many of them. The room was very quiet. Harry could hear the faint hum of the stone walls, the distant rumble of a cart somewhere far below, his own breathing. Someone put bindings on my magic. That is what we need to confirm. Ragnarok met his eyes. Mr. Potter, you are 11 years old, you have been raised without knowledge of your heritage, and you are sitting in a goblin bank being told something frightening by a creature most wizards consider lesser. You have every reason not to trust me. But I will tell you this, Gringotts has profited from House Potter's patronage for over 1,000 years. It is in our direct financial interest to ensure you are healthy, powerful, and capable of managing your considerable family assets. We have no motive to harm you and every motive to protect you. That is not sentiment. It is business. And goblins take business very seriously. Harry almost smiled at that. He thought about it, really thought about it, not the panicked way he might have if this were happening at the Dursleys, but carefully, the way he'd learned to think when Uncle Vernon was on a tear and every word mattered. Someone had put bindings on his magic. He didn't know much about magic, but he knew what a binding was. A cage. A leash. Someone had looked at a baby, at him, and decided to cage what he was. Do it, Harry said. Ragnarok nodded once, sharply, and pressed his palm flat on the table. The rune-carved surface glowed white and a low tone rang through the room, felt more than heard. Within a minute, 4 goblins entered. They were different from the bankers, lighter clothing, nimble hands, pouches at their belts filled with crystals and instruments Harry had no name for. Healers, he guessed. Mr. Potter, please sit back and remain still, the lead healer said, a female goblin with close-cropped silver hair and a kind of focused calm that reminded Harry of a surgeon on a television program he'd once watched through the Dursleys' living room doorway. You may feel warmth or pressure. If you feel pain, tell me immediately. Harry sat back. The healers arranged themselves around his chair and began working. Crystals were placed on the table, on the arms of the chair, one on each of Harry's shoulders. The lead healer drew something in the air with a long finger, not a wand, Harry noticed, just her bare hand, and the air shimmered like heat haze. Warmth. She'd said warmth. It was more than that, it was like standing in sunlight after a long winter, like something inside him was being seen for the first time, and what was being seen was wrong. Harry felt it. Not because the diagnostic hurt, but because the magic mapped what was there, and some part of him, some deep, instinctive part, recognized the shape of his own core and knew it was wrong. Tangled. Knotted. Wrapped in things that shouldn't be there, layers upon layers, like chains wound so tight they'd become part of him. The lead healer's face didn't change, but her hands stopped moving. She looked at Ragnarok. How many? Ragnarok asked. We are still counting. Her voice was perfectly steady and that steadiness was worse than if she'd sounded shocked. I will need the resonance array. Get it. One of the other healers left and returned with a flat disc of dark metal covered in engravings so fine they looked like spider silk. The lead healer placed it on the table in front of Harry and activated it with a touch. The disc hummed and projected light upward, a holographic display, Harry realized, though made of magic rather than technology. What it showed was his core. Harry didn't know what a magical core was supposed to look like, but he knew it wasn't this. The projection showed a sphere of light, brilliant, almost white at the center, pulsing with energy that even as a hologram made the air in the room feel thick. But the sphere was wrapped in threads. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Dark threads, light threads, threads that pulsed with sickly color, threads that were barbed and biting into the surface of the light, threads that snaked away from the core and disappeared into nothing, going somewhere, feeding something. The lead healer was counting, her finger moving in the air, her lips tight. 107, she said finally. The silence that followed was different from the earlier one. This silence had teeth. 107 individual bindings, blocks, suppressors, compulsions, and siphons, the healer continued, her voice clinical. Layered over a period of approximately 10 years, beginning, she consulted the array, within 24 hours of the subject's arrival at his Muggle residence. The day he was left with the Dursleys, Ragnarok said. Consistent with that timeline, yes. Harry was staring at the projection of his own core. At the chains wrapped around his magic. At the threads that burrowed and fed and stole. What are they doing to me? He asked. His voice sounded strange in his own ears. Flat. Distant. The healer glanced at Ragnarok, who nodded. I will break them into categories, she said. 43 are suppression blocks. These reduce the total output of your magical core, essentially, they make you weaker. Based on the density, I estimate your accessible magic has been reduced to approximately 8% of your actual capacity. 8%. Harry heard the words but they didn't make sense yet. They were too big. 21 are compulsion clusters. These are behavioral modification enchantments keyed to specific triggers. I will need more time to identify each one, but preliminary reading shows compulsions for, she consulted the array again, obedience toward a specific magical signature, which I will need to identify. Trust and loyalty toward specific bloodline signatures. Distrust and aversion toward other specific bloodline signatures. Reduced curiosity. Reduced self-preservation. Acceptance of physical discomfort and deprivation. Harry's hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against his thighs to make them stop. Acceptance of physical discomfort, he repeated. It would make you less likely to report abuse, the healer said. No judgment in her voice. Just fact. Less likely to seek help. Less likely to perceive your treatment as abnormal. The cupboard under the stairs. The missed meals. Dudley's fists. The way he'd always just accepted it. Thought he deserved it. Thought it was normal, or at least that complaining wouldn't change anything, so why bother, why fight, because someone had made him think that. Continue, Harry said. His voice was still flat. Still distant. But something underneath it was waking up, something that had been sleeping for a very long time, and it was not calm. 12 are intelligence dampeners, the healer said. They reduce cognitive function, processing speed, memory retention, pattern recognition. They are subtle. You would still appear functional, even bright by average standards, but your natural capability is being throttled significantly. They made me stupid, Harry said. They made you average. There is a difference, and the intent matters. Someone wanted you capable enough to function but not enough to question. Harry looked at Ragnarok. The goblin's face was carved from stone, but his eyes were burning. The rest? Harry asked. 19 are emotional regulators, they dampen anger, dampen ambition, amplify guilt and self-doubt. 7 are tracking charms of various sophistication. 3 are health suppressors, which, the healer paused for the first time, and something crossed her face that might have been anger, which have been stunting your physical growth, reducing your appetite, and weakening your immune system. They are the reason you are undersized and malnourished despite presumably having access to food. I didn't, actually, Harry said. Have access to food. Not always. They locked it away sometimes. Nobody spoke for a long time. The projection of Harry's chained core pulsed slowly in the silence, light fighting against the dark threads wrapped around it. And the last 2? Ragnarok asked the healer. The last 2 are siphons. The healer pointed at the projection, 2 thick, dark threads that emerged from the core and trailed away into nothing. They are actively draining magical energy from Mr. Potter's core and redirecting it elsewhere. I cannot determine the destination from here, we would need to trace them at the source. But the drain is substantial. Combined with the suppression blocks, Mr. Potter is currently operating at approximately 3 to 4% of his actual magical potential. Harry let that number sit in the room. 3 to 4%. Everything he'd ever done, the accidental magic, the strange things that happened around him, the glass at the zoo, growing his hair back overnight, operating onto the school roof, all of that, every bit of magic that had ever burst through despite 10 years of abuse and starvation and being told he was nothing, that was 3 to 4% of what he actually was. Who? Harry said. Ragnarok looked at him. Who did this to me? The bindings carry a magical signature, the healer said carefully. We can identify it. But identification requires, identify it. The healer worked for another minute, drawing something from one of the binding threads and catching it in a crystal that glowed faint purple. She studied it, turned it, studied it again. The signature is consistent across all 107 bindings, she said. They were all placed by the same caster. The signature matches. She looked at Ragnarok again. Say it, Ragnarok said. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. Harry didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't breathe for a long moment. Dumbledore. The name Hagrid had spoken with such reverence. The man who'd sent Hagrid to bring him his letter. The man who'd left him at the Dursleys' doorstep. The man who'd apparently decided, when Harry was barely a year old, to wrap his magic in 100 chains and leave him in a house where he'd be starved and beaten and told he was worthless, and who'd made sure, with magic, that Harry would never think to fight back. I see, Harry said. Ragnarok watched him carefully. Whatever he was looking for, he seemed to find it. Mr. Potter, under the Treaty of Carthage, ratified in 1412 and reaffirmed in the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy, the deliberate binding, suppression, or siphoning of a magical being's core without informed consent constitutes a Class 1 violation. It is, in legal terms, equivalent to magical enslavement. The treaty grants Gringotts jurisdiction over all such violations when they are detected within our wards. Ragnarok's voice was precise, almost ceremonial. The penalty under goblin law is severe. Under wizard law, it carries a minimum sentence of life imprisonment in Azkaban. You can arrest him. We can arrest him. We will arrest him. The evidence is incontrovertible, 107 individual violations, all carrying his signature, all performed on a minor, all performed on the heir of a most ancient and noble house that is under our protection. Ragnarok leaned forward. But the timing matters, Mr. Potter. And I need you to understand why. Harry waited. Dumbledore is the most politically powerful wizard in Britain. He holds 3 positions simultaneously, Headmaster of Hogwarts, Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot, and Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards. If we arrest him quietly, his allies will mobilize before the evidence is presented. They will question goblin jurisdiction. They will frame this as a political attack. They will delay, obfuscate, and negotiate, and there is a reasonable chance he will never see trial. So don't arrest him quietly. Ragnarok smiled. It was the first genuine expression Harry had seen on the goblin's face, and it was sharp. No, Ragnarok agreed. We won't. The Hogwarts sorting feast, Mr. Potter. Every student, every professor, reporters from the Daily Prophet for the annual start-of-term feature. The most public, most visible, most undeniable moment in the wizarding calendar. We arrest him there, in front of everyone, with the evidence already filed with every relevant magical authority, and his allies wake up the next morning to a front page they cannot spin. Harry sat with that for a moment. Then, that's not just justice. That's strategy. Goblins do not distinguish between the two. Ragnarok opened the leather folder on the table. Now. The more pressing matter. Your blocks need to be removed, and it must be done carefully. Removing 107 bindings at once from an 11-year-old, even one with a core as powerful as yours, could be dangerous if done carelessly. I propose a staged removal over the weeks between now and September 1st. You would come to Gringotts daily through a secure portal we will establish. Each session will remove a set of bindings and allow your core to adjust. I'm staying with the Dursleys until September. We are aware. The portal will be placed in your residence, keyed to you alone, invisible to muggles. Ragnarok paused. Mr. Potter, I must also tell you that the removal process will change you. Not your personality is your own, despite the compulsions, but you will think more clearly. You will feel emotions more intensely. Your magic will grow, rapidly, as the suppressions lift. You will need training to manage the influx, and we can provide that. Goblin combat magic, core exercises, occlumency to protect your mind. Occlumency. The art of defending your thoughts from external intrusion. Given that someone has spent a decade manipulating your mind, I consider it a priority. Harry's jaw tightened. Yes. I want that. There is one more thing. Ragnarok pulled a sheet of parchment from the folder. Dense text, seals at the bottom. As the last living Potter and a client of Gringotts, you are entitled to claim your full inheritance and the title of head of House Potter. Normally this would wait until you are of age at 17, but the circumstances are extraordinary. Your magical guardian has been identified as your abuser, which under both goblin and wizard law triggers an automatic emancipation clause. You can claim your title now. Today. What does that mean, practically? It means no one can claim guardianship over you again. It means your seats on the Wisengamot, yes, plural, House Potter holds 3, are yours to use or delegate. It means your family's full vaults, properties, and political alliances fall under your control. And it means that when Albus Dumbledore is arrested at the sorting feast, he will not be facing a child he abused. He will be facing the head of the most ancient and noble house of Potter, backed by the full weight of the Goblin nation. Harry picked up the parchment and read it. Every word. It took a while. The legal language was dense and he was 11, even if his natural intelligence was starting to push against the dampeners still on his mind. But he read it all. Then he signed it. The moment the quill left the parchment, something shifted. Not in the room, in him. He felt a warmth settle across his right hand, and when he looked down, a ring had appeared on his finger. Gold, with a ruby set in a griffin's head, ancient and heavy and his. Welcome back, Lord Potter, Ragnarok said. Your house has missed you. They started that afternoon. The first session removed 12 of the suppression blocks, the ones the healers judged least entangled with the others, and Harry nearly screamed. Not from pain, though there was pain, a deep burning sensation like pulling thorns that had grown roots. He nearly screamed because of what rushed in when the blocks came off. Magic. His magic. Not the trickle he'd felt before, not the vague sense that something was there. This was a river. A flood. It poured through channels that had been dammed since he was a baby, and it was furious, not at him, never at him, but at the things that had held it back. He could feel it pressing against the remaining blocks, testing them, wanting out. Wanting to be whole. He sat in the healing chamber with his hands pressed flat on the stone floor and felt the mountain around him. Felt the magic in the stone, the ancient goblin wards, the heat of the earth far below. Felt the ley line that ran beneath Gringotts like a buried river of power. Felt everything, and it was too much and not enough, and he wanted to laugh and cry and burn something to the ground all at the same time. Breathe, Mr. Potter, the lead healer said. Harry breathed. The flood settled. Not gone, just waiting. Patient now, where a moment ago it had been wild. That was 12 blocks, Harry said. Out of 107. 43 suppressors total, the healer confirmed. You felt the release of approximately 20% of your suppressed capacity. I can feel the wards on this building. Yes. At full capacity, I suspect you will be able to feel a great deal more. Harry looked at his hands. They were shaking again, but not from fear this time. From power. From potential, caged and stolen and finally, slowly, carefully, being returned. When do we do the next session? Tomorrow. Same time. The compulsions we will address in the third session, those require more delicate work. And the siphons? Last. The siphons are the most deeply embedded. We will trace their destination before removal. Harry nodded. He stood up and was surprised to find that he felt taller. Not physically, the health suppressors were still in place, but something in his posture had changed. Some instinct to hunch, to shrink, to take up less space, had loosened. "Mr. Potter," the healer said as he turned to leave. "You should know, in 1200 years of goblin healing practice, I have never seen a core like yours. The size of it. Even at 3%, you were performing accidental magic that most adult wizards could not replicate intentionally. When you are fully unbound," she paused, chose her words. "There has not been a wizard of your potential in a very long time." "How long?" "I would have to consult the records. But the last comparable core I am aware of belonged to Merlin." Harry didn't know what to do with that, so he put it away for later and walked back through the portal to his cupboard under the stairs. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Harry's life, which was saying something for a boy who'd recently learned he was a wizard. Every morning at 5, before the Dursleys woke, Harry pressed his palm against the back wall of his cupboard and the portal opened, a shimmer of gold light, silent as breath, and he stepped through into Gringotts. The healing sessions continued. 12 blocks the first day, 8 the second, then clusters of compulsions teased apart thread by thread. The compulsion removal was worse than the blocks. The blocks were chains, you cut them and the magic flowed. The compulsions were woven into his thinking, tangled with memories, attached to emotions. Removing them meant feeling each one lift and recognizing, with horrible clarity, which of his thoughts had been his own and which had been planted. The obedience compulsion keyed to Dumbledore's magical signature. Harry remembered hearing Hagrid say Dumbledore's name and feeling an instinctive warmth, an automatic trust, a sense that this was someone safe. That wasn't real. That was a spell on a baby. The loyalty compulsions keyed to specific bloodlines. The healers identified two, one for the Weasley family signature, one for Muggleborns in general. Not that there was anything wrong with either group, but the compulsion meant Harry's reactions to them would have been artificially amplified. Instant friendship. Unquestioning trust. Bonds that felt organic but were engineered. He was building your social circle before you ever met anyone in it, Ragnarok observed during one of their daily briefings. Ensuring you'd attach to the right people. His people. The distrust compulsions were the mirror image, keyed to make Harry instinctively dislike anyone with bloodlines associated with dark families. Malfoy. Not. Zabini. Greengrass. An entire category of people Harry was supposed to hate on sight, before they'd ever spoken a word to him. "I won't pretend some of them aren't terrible people on their own merits," Ragnarok said. "But you deserve to make that judgment yourself." One by one, the compulsions came off. And Harry changed. Not into a different person, the healers were right about that. His personality was his own. But it was like cleaning a window that had been painted over for years. The view was the same, you could just finally see it. He was sharper. Faster. His mind moved in ways it hadn't before, making connections, seeing patterns, remembering things with crystalline precision. The intelligence dampeners had been among the first to go and the difference was staggering. He read through his school books in a single weekend and not only understood them but saw gaps and contradictions and questions the texts didn't answer. He asked Ragnarok for more books. Ragnarok provided the Potter family library, portable, shrunk into a trunk that fit under Harry's arm. Thousands of volumes. Harry devoured them. The physical changes came slower. The health suppressors were removed in the third week, and the healers started him on nutrient potions and goblin healing treatments that made his bones ache as they grew. By August, he'd gained 2 inches and 10 pounds. Still small for 11, but no longer the skeletal, underfed waif who'd slept in a cupboard. His features sharpened as the malnutrition receded, cheekbones emerging, jaw squaring. His hair, always wild, settled into something less chaotic. And his eyes, his mother's eyes, everyone always said, seemed brighter. Greener. More alive. The Dursleys noticed none of this, because Ragnarok had arranged a passive glamour, goblin-forged, undetectable by wizard magic, that made Harry look exactly as he had before to anyone who wasn't keyed into the enchantment. As far as Petunia and Vernon were concerned, Harry was the same scrawny, quiet, obedient boy he'd always been. Harry let them think that. He cooked their breakfasts and weeded their garden and said, "Yes, Aunt Petunia," and, "No, Uncle Vernon," and did not think about how easy it would be, now, to do something about the way they treated him. Not because he was afraid. Because it wasn't time yet. Because Ragnarok had taught him, in their daily sessions, that power spent carelessly was power wasted. Goblins do not believe in revenge, Ragnarok told him once, over a working lunch of roast meat and dark bread. We believe in leverage. Revenge is a single action. Leverage is a position. One spends itself. The other compounds. Harry learned goblin combat magic in the deep training halls beneath Gringotts, where the stone was so old it predated Hogwarts by 1,000 years. Goblin magic was different from wizard magic. It didn't use wands, for one thing, which the wizards had always treated as proof of goblin inferiority. But watching goblin warriors train, Harry understood that wands were a crutch, not an advancement. Goblin magic was raw, direct, powered by will and intent and channeled through the body itself. It was harder to learn but impossible to disarm. Harry trained with a goblin warrior named Steelfang, who was 4 feet tall and could have killed Harry 6 different ways before he blinked. Steelfang did not care that Harry was the boy who lived. Steelfang did not care that Harry's core was comparable to Merlin's. Steelfang cared about form, discipline, and whether Harry could block a concussive bolt without flinching. Magic is not power, Steelfang told him, after knocking him flat for the 12th time in an hour. Magic is potential. Power is what you do with it. A river is not powerful. A river is just water. A dam is powerful. A mill is powerful. A flood is powerful. You are currently a river. You need to become a flood. I thought you were going to say a dam, Harry said from the floor. Dams are for builders. Mills are for workers. You, Potter, are a weapon. Act like one. Harry got up and blocked the 13th bolt. He learned occlumency from Ragnarok himself, who was not a healer or a warrior but something rarer, a goblin mind adept, trained in the old arts of mental defense and psychic warfare. Wizard occlumency, Ragnarok explained, was typically taught through attack. A legilimens would assault the student's mind and the student would learn to defend through repeated violation. It was, in Ragnarok's opinion, barbaric and stupid. You do not teach someone to swim by drowning them, Ragnarok said. You teach them the water. Goblin occlumency started from the inside. Harry learned to feel the shape of his own mind, its rooms and corridors, its memories stored like books on shelves, its emotions flowing like currents through everything. He learned to build walls not by forcing them up but by understanding what he was protecting and why. The walls grew from conviction, not fear. They were strong because Harry had something worth protecting, his true self, the self that had been buried under 100 compulsions, and he would die before letting anyone touch it again. By mid-August, Ragnarok tested Harry's defenses by hiring a professional legilimens, a goblin mind adept far more experienced than Ragnarok himself, to attempt a breach. The legilimens tried for 40 minutes. He did not get in. Acceptable, Ragnarok said afterward, which Harry had learned was goblin for extraordinary. The siphons were the last to go. They'd been traced by then. The goblin warders had followed the energy threads from Harry's core through layers of magical infrastructure, ward schemes, redirectors, ancient enchantments laid into the stone of a building far to the north. Hogwarts, Ragnarok told Harry, spreading a schematic across the table. Both siphons terminate in the Hogwarts ward matrix. One feeds the general ward structure. Dumbledore has been using your magic to power the school's protections. The other, he tapped a specific point on the schematic, feeds into a sealed section of the ward scheme that we cannot fully analyze from here. It is hidden. Deliberately. Whatever it powers, Dumbledore did not want it found. Can you remove the siphons without disrupting the wards? We can. The wards will weaken without your magic feeding them, but Hogwarts has its own power source. It has stood for 1,000 years without parasitizing students. The wards will hold. They will simply be reduced to their natural level rather than the artificially inflated state Dumbledore has maintained. The siphon removal happened on August 30th, 2 days before Harry would board the Hogwarts Express. It was the most painful session yet. The siphons had roots that went deep, wrapped around the base of his core like parasitic vines, and tearing them free felt like pulling barbed wire through his chest. Harry sat in the healing chamber and gripped the arms of the stone chair and did not scream, though his magic screamed for him, the air around him crackling, the crystals on the walls humming, the healer's instruments rattling on their trays. And then it was done. 107 bindings. Gone. All of them. Harry stood up. The room flexed. That was the only word for it. His magic expanded outward like a shockwave, pressing against the walls, filling the chamber, filling the corridor beyond, reaching down into the stone of the mountain and up through the ceiling toward the sky. The healers staggered. Ragnarok grabbed the edge of the table. In the main hall of Gringotts, 3 floors up, every detection ward in the building went off simultaneously. Harry pulled it back. Drew it in. Felt it settle into his core, his real core, unbound, unchained, vast and bright and his, and held it there. Controlled. Contained. Not because he was afraid of it, but because Steel Fang had taught him that a weapon sheath was more dangerous than a weapon drawn. Well, Ragnarok said, straightening his suit. That was dramatic. Harry looked at him. His eyes were glowing, literally glowing, a vivid killing curse green that cast light on the walls around him. He blinked, and it faded to their normal brightness. Which was still considerable. I feel. Harry started, and stopped. There wasn't a word. There wasn't a word in English or gobbledygook or any language he'd encountered for what it felt like to be whole after 11 years of being a fraction of yourself. To feel your own mind, clear and sharp and fast. To feel your own magic, enormous and eager and absolutely under your command. To feel your own body, still healing but growing stronger every day, free of the suppressions that had kept him small and weak and hungry. Ready, he finished. I feel ready. Good, Ragnarok said. Because in 2 days, you walk into Hogwarts. And in 2 days, we burn Albus Dumbledore's empire to the ground. The morning of September 1st, Harry stood in his room at the Dursleys. They'd given him Dudley's second bedroom after Hagrid's visit, though Harry suspected that had more to do with Hagrid's umbrella than any sudden compassion, and looked at himself in the mirror. The glamour showed the old Harry. Small, thin, messy-haired, scar visible on his forehead, round glasses slightly crooked. A boy who looked like he'd apologize for existing if you stared at him too long. Harry dropped the glamour. The real Harry looked back at him. Taller by 3 inches. Broader in the shoulders. His face had lost the pinched, starved look and gained definition. He looked like a younger version of his father's photos, but with his mother's eyes and a sharpness to his expression that was entirely his own. His hair was still dark and unruly, but it suited him now. The scar was still there, but fainter, as if the unblocking had diminished whatever magic lingered in it. He didn't look 11. He looked like something older and considerably more dangerous. Harry put the glamour back on. Not because he was hiding, the glamour would come off at Hogwarts, Ragnarok had agreed to that, but because the Dursleys didn't deserve to see who he really was. They'd had 11 years with Harry Potter, and they'd wasted every single one. He picked up his trunk, featherlight charmed by the goblins, containing not only his school supplies but the portable Potter library, a set of goblin-forged training crystals, 3 changes of clothes that actually fit him, and a sealed letter from Ragnarok to be opened, when the time is right. He walked downstairs, past Aunt Petunia who didn't look up from her magazine, past Dudley who flinched away from him out of habit, past Uncle Vernon who grunted something about freaks. Goodbye, Harry said pleasantly. He walked out the front door and did not look back. King's Cross was crowded with muggles, and Harry navigated through them easily. He found the barrier between platforms 9 and 10 and watched for a moment as a family of redheads, loud, cheerful, unmistakably magical, piled through one by one. Weasleys, he thought. He recognized the description from Ragnarok's briefings. The loyalty compulsion toward them was gone, which meant whatever he felt about them now would be genuine. He watched the youngest son, his age, gangly, with a smudge on his nose, disappear through the barrier, and felt nothing in particular. Just mild curiosity. That was honest, and honestly was something Harry valued very highly now. He walked through the barrier and onto platform 9 3/4. The Hogwarts Express was scarlet and beautiful and steaming impatiently, and the platform was a chaos of owls and trunks and parents hugging children and children trying to escape parents. Harry stood at the edge of it and breathed it in. This was the world that had been kept from him. The world he'd been born into and stolen from. He was back now, and he was going to shake it to its foundations. He boarded the train, found an empty compartment near the back, stowed his trunk, and sat by the window. The glamour was still on. He looked like just another first year, small, nervous, ordinary. The train lurched and began to move. Platform 9 3/4 slid away. London gave way to countryside, green and gold under a September sun. In 48 hours, Harry thought, Albus Dumbledore would stand in front of the entire school and raise his glass for the start-of-term toast. He would not finish it. Harry closed his eyes, felt his magic humming beneath his skin, vast and patient and ready, and allowed himself, for the first time in his life, to smile like he meant it. Chapter 2, The Sorting Storm. The countryside rolled past in a blur of green and gold, hedgerows and sheep and the occasional village flashing by like postcards thrown from a window. Harry sat with his feet up on the opposite seat and a copy of Theories of Transubstantial Transfiguration open in his lap, though he wasn't really reading it. He was listening. The train was alive with noise, compartment doors sliding open and banging shut, laughter and shouts echoing down the corridor, the sweet trolley rattling somewhere ahead, an owl hooting indignantly from inside someone's trunk. Dozens of magical signatures pressed against Harry's awareness like lights flickering at the edge of his vision. He could feel them all now, every witch and wizard on this train, each one a different flavor and intensity. Some bright, some dim, some steady, some erratic. He hadn't told Ragnarok about this particular development. It had started 3 days after the final siphon removal, a passive awareness of magical signatures within a certain radius. The healers had mentioned that a fully unbound core of his magnitude might develop ancillary sensory capabilities, which was goblin healer speak for we don't entirely know what you'll be able to do. Harry had decided to keep quiet about it until he understood it better. The compartment door slid open. Anyone sitting here? The red-headed boy from the platform, Ron Weasley, had to be, stood in the doorway, looking hopeful and slightly desperate. Everywhere else is full. Harry glanced past him down the corridor. It wasn't full. There were at least 3 compartments with space that he could see from here. But the boy wanted to sit with someone, and there was no compulsion charm telling Harry to like him, which meant whatever happened next would be real. Go ahead, Harry said. Ron dropped into the opposite seat with the boneless gratitude of someone who'd been wandering. Thanks. I'm Ron. Ron Weasley. Harry Potter. Ron's eyes went wide. His gaze flicked up to Harry's forehead, the glamour showed the scar, faint beneath his fringe, and then back down with the visible effort of someone trying not to stare. Blimey, Ron said. I mean, sorry, it's just, you're Harry Potter. So I'm told. Is it true you've got a, Ron gestured vaguely at his own forehead. Harry pushed his fringe back. The scar was there, lightning-shaped, though under the glamour it looked more vivid than it actually was now. Ron stared at it with open fascination. Wicked, Ron breathed, then seemed to realize what he'd said. Sorry. That's probably annoying. People probably do that all the time. You're actually the first, Harry said, and that was true. Tell me about your family. You've got brothers at Hogwarts? That was all it took. Ron launched into a sprawling account of the Weasley clan, Bill in Egypt, Charlie in Romania, Percy the prefect, the twins Fred and George who were apparently agents of chaos in human form, and Ginny, the youngest, who'd cried at the platform because she couldn't go yet. Harry listened. Without the compulsion charm, Ron Weasley was, fine. Likeable enough, in the way that enthusiastic, slightly insecure people often were. He talked too much and listened too little and had the particular anxiety of a boy who felt outshone by his brothers, which Harry recognized because he'd spent years being deliberately outshone by Dudley, except in his case it had been engineered. Ron's insecurity was organic and therefore more sympathetic. But Harry noticed things. Small things, the kind of things the intelligence dampeners would have buried. Ron mentioned Dumbledore 3 times in 10 minutes, always with reverence. Ron's father worked at the ministry. Ron's family was, by his own embarrassed admission, poor, and yet they were pure blood, which in the wizarding world should have meant old money and political influence. Something had happened to the Weasley fortunes, and Harry filed that away for later. "What about you?" Ron asked eventually. "What's it like, growing up with muggles?" "Educational," Harry said, which was honest without being informative, and redirected before Ron could push. "What house do you want?" "Gryffindor," Ron said instantly. "Whole family's been Gryffindor." "I dunno what they'd say if I wasn't." "What about you?" Harry thought about it. He already knew what house he'd choose, Ragnarok, and he had discussed it at length, but he was curious about something. "What do you know about the other houses?" "Well, Slytherin's out, obviously. Every dark wizard ever came from Slytherin." "You know who was in Slytherin?" Ron said it with the casual certainty of someone repeating something they'd heard 1,000 times. "Ravenclaw's alright, I suppose, if you're really brainy." "Hufflepuff, well, Hufflepuff's Hufflepuff, isn't it?" "That's a very specific analysis." Ron grinned. "I know what I know." The compartment door opened again. A girl with bushy brown hair and an expression of determined purpose stood in the doorway. She was already in her school robes, which seemed premature given they were barely an hour into the journey, and she was holding a slightly panicked-looking toad. "Has anyone seen a toad? A boy named Neville's lost one." She said this with the air of someone organizing a search and rescue operation, then noticed Harry's book. "Oh, Theories of Transubstantial Transfiguration, that's not on the first-year reading list. That's a fourth-year supplementary text." "I tried to get it but Flourish and Blot said, it's from my family library," Harry said. "I'm Harry. This is Ron." "Hermione Granger," she said, and sat down without being invited, the toad squirming in her grip. "I'm Muggle-born. I didn't know about magic until I got my letter, so I've been reading everything I can get my hands on. I've memorized all the set texts, of course, and I've read Hogwarts, a history and a history of magic. And have you tried a summoning charm on the toad?" Harry asked. Hermione blinked. "That's a fourth-year charm. It's also a 6-word incantation with a simple wrist movement. The year designation is about when they teach it, not when it's possible to learn it." Harry held out his hand toward the corridor. He almost used wandless magic, goblin-trained, instinctive now, but caught himself. He wasn't dropping the glamour yet, and a first-year casting wandlessly would attract attention he didn't want for another few hours. He pulled out the wand he'd bought at Ollivander's instead. Holly, 11 inches, Phoenix Feather Core. It felt like shaking hands with an old friend every time he picked it up. Accio Neville's toad. The toad in Hermione's hands leaped free and shot into the corridor. A moment later, a second toad came zooming in from 3 compartments down and landed with a wet plop in Harry's palm. Ron was staring. Hermione was staring harder. "That was a nonverbal directional summons with a conceptual target lock," Hermione said, sounding like she was quoting a textbook while simultaneously having a religious experience. "You didn't specify the toad's name or location. You used the owner's name as a reference anchor. That's not fourth year." Can you show me your book?" she finished abruptly, pointing at the Transfiguration text. Harry handed it over. Hermione began reading immediately, apparently forgetting about the toad, the lost boy, and social convention in general. "I'll just take Trevor back to Neville, shall I?" Ron said, picking up the toad with 2 fingers and a grimace. "Third compartment up on the left," Harry said, because he could feel a magical signature there that was flickering with anxiety in a way that matched Boy Who's Lost His Toad. Ron left. Hermione didn't look up. Harry watched the countryside roll past and thought about what Ragnarok had said about Neville Longbottom. The goblins had flagged Neville during their investigation, not because of any connection to Harry's blocks, but because the Longbottom accounts had shown irregularities that, once they knew what to look for, formed a familiar pattern. Neville had blocks too. Fewer, Ragnarok estimated around 20, and placed by a different caster, signature unknown. His magical guardian was his grandmother, Augusta Longbottom, who was formidable but likely unaware. The goblins hadn't been able to act yet because Neville hadn't entered the bank, but they'd prepared a discreet approach. The compartment door slid open again and Ron returned, trailing a round-faced boy who clutched his toad with both hands and looked like he expected someone to yell at him for existing. Harry knew that look. He'd worn it for 10 years. "This is Neville," Ron said. "Neville, Harry Potter." Hello," Neville said. "Thanks for finding Trevor. I'm always losing him. Gran says I'd lose my head if it wasn't screwed on." "Sit down, Neville," Harry said, and something in his tone, not a command, but a warmth, a recognition, made Neville blink and then, slowly, sit. Harry studied him. A round, anxious face. Nervous eyes that darted to every sudden noise. Shoulders hunched inward, making himself small. A magical signature that should have been strong. The Longbottoms were an ancient house, the magic bred true, but was muffled, dampened, wrapped in something that made it flicker instead of shine. Blocks. Harry could see them now, or rather sense them, dark spots in Neville's magical signature, like bruises on fruit. 20 was probably conservative. It might be closer to 30. "Neville," Harry said quietly, "have you ever been to Gringotts?" "Once, when I was little. Gran took me." "Have they ever done an inheritance verification on you?" Neville looked confused. "A what?" "I don't think so." "Why?" Harry filed that away. "Not now. Not on a train full of strangers. But soon." "Just curious," Harry said. "Which house are you hoping for?" Neville's face fell. "Gran wants me in Gryffindor. My mum and dad were both Gryffindor. But I'm not really brave enough, I don't think." "Bravery isn't about not being afraid," Harry said. "It's about being afraid and doing the thing anyway." Neville looked at him, really looked, not the nervous glance away that seemed to be his default, and something shifted in his expression. Not confidence, not yet. But a small, tentative spark. "That's what my mum used to say," Neville said softly. Before. Harry knew the Longbottom story. Frank and Alice, tortured into insanity by Bellatrix Lestrange. Neville raised by his grandmother. Another child shaped by violence and loss, though in a different way than Harry. "Your mum sounds like she was smart," Harry said. Neville almost smiled. The train rattled onward. Hermione finished the Transfiguration text and immediately began interrogating Harry about his understanding of core theory, which turned into a genuine conversation when Harry answered questions she'd clearly expected no 11-year-old to engage with. Ron ate chocolate frogs and contributed commentary that was mostly wrong but entertainingly delivered. Neville listened quietly, feeding Trevor bits of his sandwich, and every now and then asked a question that was surprisingly perceptive beneath the stammer. The compartment door opened one more time, an hour from Hogwarts. Draco Malfoy entered with the practiced confidence of someone who'd been told since birth that every room belonged to him. Flanked by 2 large boys who were clearly there for decoration rather than conversation, He stood in the doorway and swept the compartment with a gaze that was calculating rather than casual. "They're saying Harry Potter is on the train." His eyes found Harry's scar. "So it's true." "Draco Malfoy," Harry said, before Malfoy could introduce himself. That threw him. A flicker of surprise, quickly buried. "You've heard of my family." "I've heard of most of the old families. The Malfoys have held a Wisengamot seat since 1647, and your family's investment in the Goblin silver trade during the Second Goblin War was a significant factor in the post-war economic settlement." Harry paused. "Your father was a Death Eater who claimed to be under the Imperius curse. Jury's still out on that one, I suppose." The compartment went very quiet. Ron had stopped chewing. Hermione had looked up from the book. Neville was trying to disappear into his seat. Malfoy's expression was doing something complicated. He'd clearly come in with a script, the opening move in whatever social chess game his father had taught him, and Harry had just flipped the board. "I came to introduce myself," Malfoy said carefully. "Some wizarding families are better than others, Potter. You don't want to make friends with the wrong sort." He glanced at Ron, the dismissal obvious. "I can help you there." "Here's what I think," Harry said, and his voice was pleasant, conversational, the way Ragnarok sounded when he was about to deliver very bad news. "I think your father sent you in here with instructions. Be friendly to Potter. Get close. Establish influence. Because Harry Potter is either a political asset or a political threat, and the Malfoys like to know which before they commit." He tilted his head. "How am I doing?" Malfoy stared at him. His composure was good, better than most adults, actually, which spoke to training, but Harry could see the fracture lines. "I'm not your enemy, Malfoy," Harry continued. "But I'm not your tool either. If you want to talk to me, you can do it without the sales pitch. If your father wants to talk to me, he can make an appointment through Gringotts like everyone else." Now, was there something else? Malfoy's mouth opened. Closed. He looked at Harry for a long moment, and something recalculated behind his grey eyes, not anger, but reassessment. The kind of look a chess player gives the board when they realize their opponent knows the game. "Interesting," Malfoy said quietly. He turned and left. His two bookends lumbered after him. Ron let out a breath like a deflating balloon. "Bloody hell, Harry." "That was," Hermione started. "Overdue, probably," Harry said. "His family's been positioning for this meeting since my name appeared on the Hogwarts roster. Better to set expectations now than play his game for a year and have it blow up later." "You sounded like a politician," Neville said, and then looked horrified at his own boldness. "I sounded like a goblin," Harry corrected, grinning. "They'd consider that a compliment." The train pulled into Hogsmeade Station as the sun was dipping below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and violet. Harry felt Hogwarts before he saw it, an enormous magical presence to the north, old and deep and aware, like a sleeping giant that noticed his arrival and turned one vast eye in his direction. His magic stirred in response. Reaching out. Tasting the castle's wards, feeling their shape and texture. They were strong but strained, a framework designed for a certain capacity now operating above it through artificial means. Through his magic, he realized. For 10 years, his stolen power had been feeding these wards. They recognized the signature even though the siphon was cut. They were reaching back toward him like a dog greeting a returned owner. "Fur's years. Fur's years over here." Hagrid's voice boomed across the platform. Harry followed the crowd toward the lake, where a fleet of small boats waited. He ended up in a boat with Ron, Neville, and Hermione, which felt natural enough. The boats pushed off from the shore on their own and glided across black water. And then they rounded the bend and saw Hogwarts. Harry heard Hermione gasp. Heard Ron whisper something odd. Heard Neville make a small sound in his throat. He understood, the castle was extraordinary, towers and turrets rising against the darkening sky, every window glowing with warm light, the whole structure perched on a cliff above the lake like something from a story. But Harry felt something else. The castle's magic, vast, ancient, layered with 1,000 years of enchantment, pressing against his awareness like a hand on his shoulder. Welcoming him. And beneath that welcome, something else. Something desperate. The wards were tired. They'd been pushed beyond their natural limits for a decade, fed on stolen magic that had been suddenly cut off, and they were straining. Not failing, not yet, but weakened in ways that would matter if they were ever tested. Dumbledore had hollowed out Hogwarts' protections to serve his own purposes, and he'd used Harry's magic to paper over the damage. When the goblins traced the siphon, they'd found the first thread feeding the general wards. But the second thread, the one that led to the sealed, hidden section, that was still a mystery. Harry filed it away. One thing at a time. Tonight was about the sorting. And the arrest. They climbed stone steps from the lake shore to a massive oak door. Hagrid knocked 3 times. The door swung open and a tall, severe-looking witch in emerald robes stood framed in the entrance, her expression exactly the kind of strict that made first years want to become smaller. "The first years, Professor McGonagall," Hagrid said. "Thank you, Hagrid. I will take them from here." She led them through an entrance hall that was bigger than the Dursleys' entire house, past a doorway through which Harry could hear the buzz of hundreds of voices, the rest of the school, already seated, and into a small chamber off the main hall. "Welcome to Hogwarts," McGonagall said, and delivered a speech about the 4 houses that was clearly well rehearsed but no less effective for it. Harry watched her as she spoke. Her magical signature was strong, steady, and carried the particular flavor of someone who'd been teaching so long that magic and instruction had become the same thing in her mind. She believed in the system she was describing. She believed in the school. He wondered how much of that belief would survive tonight. McGonagall left to prepare the sorting. The first years milled nervously. Ron was muttering about trolls. Neville was nearly green. Hermione was reciting spells under her breath like prayers. Malfoy was standing apart with his bookends, composed, though Harry caught him glancing over more than once. "They can't make us fight a troll, right?" Ron asked Harry. "Fred said they make you fight a troll, but Fred's a liar, so, it's a hat," Harry said. "A what?" "A sorting hat. It reads your mind and assigns you to a house based on your qualities. It was originally enchanted by the founders." Ron looked relieved. Hermione looked fascinated. Neville looked even more nervous, which Harry hadn't thought possible. "It reads your mind." Neville squeaked. "Relax," Harry said. "It's been doing this for 1,000 years. It's probably very professional about it." McGonagall returned and led them into the great hall. Harry had read about it, the enchanted ceiling showing the night sky, the 4 long house tables, the staff table at the far end, the candles floating in midair, but reading about it and walking into it were different things. The hall was enormous and alive, hundreds of faces turning to watch them enter, the ceiling above showing stars just beginning to emerge in a purple-black sky. At the staff table, a row of adults watched with varying degrees of interest and scrutiny. And there, in the center of the staff table, in a high-backed golden chair, sat Albus Dumbledore. Harry felt him immediately. Not through his eyes, through his magic. Dumbledore's magical signature was enormous, nearly as large as the ambient magic of the castle itself, a complex swirl of power that felt like honey and iron and something ancient and calculating. It was the same signature the healers had pulled from every one of Harry's 107 bindings. Harry knew it intimately now. He'd felt its echoes in his own core for weeks as the blocks were removed, like fingerprints left at a crime scene. Dumbledore was watching the first years with a benign, twinkling expression, the kindly grandfather act that had apparently fooled the entire wizarding world for a century. His eyes found Harry in the crowd and the twinkle intensified. Harry felt something brush against his mind, light, almost playful, like a cat batting at a string. Legilimency. Casual, reflexive, the mental equivalent of a handshake. Dumbledore was reading every first year who made eye contact with him. The probe hit Harry's occlumency shields and stopped. Like walking into a glass wall. Harry didn't react. Didn't change his expression. Just kept walking with the other first years, letting the glamour show a small, overwhelmed boy staring at the ceiling with his mouth open. But he saw Dumbledore's expression flicker. Just for a moment. A crack in the twinkle. Then it was back, smooth and warm, and Dumbledore looked away as if nothing had happened. You felt that, didn't you, Harry thought. Something bounced you for the first time in God knows how long, and you don't know what it was. Good. Be confused. Be worried. You've got about 45 minutes before it stops mattering. McGonagall set a stool at the front of the hall and placed a battered, patched wizard's hat on top of it. The hat twitched, a rip near the brim opened wide, and it began to sing. Harry listened to the song, a rundown of each house's qualities, set to a melody that was either charmingly rustic or painfully off-key depending on your tolerance, and waited. The song ended. The hall applauded. McGonagall unrolled a scroll. When I call your name, you will put on the hat and sit on the stool to be sorted. Abbott, Hannah. A pink-faced girl stumbled forward. The hat barely touched her head before shouting, Hufflepuff, and one of the tables erupted in cheers. Names were called. Students were sorted. Harry watched each one, feeling their magical signatures as they sat under the hat, some bright, some nervous, some steadied by the hat's presence in their minds. Hermione went to Gryffindor, looking relieved. Neville went to Gryffindor too, though the hat took a long time with him, nearly 4 minutes, and when it finally shouted the house name, Neville looked more surprised than anyone. Malfoy, Draco. Malfoy strode forward with his chin up. The hat barely grazed his hair before screaming, Slytherin, and Malfoy went to join the green and silver table with the satisfied air of someone who just confirmed a booking. More names. More sortings. Then, Potter, Harry. The hall went very, very quiet. Then the whispering started, a wave of it, rippling outward from every table. Potter, did she say? The Harry Potter? Where? Harry walked to the stool. He sat down. McGonagall lowered the hat onto his head. Darkness. Then, oh my. The voice was inside his head, but it wasn't intrusive like Dumbledore's probe had been. It felt more like someone had opened a door and was standing politely on the threshold. Hello, Harry thought. My dear boy. The hat's voice was ancient and layered, like pages rustling. My dear, dear boy. What have they done to you? You can see it. I can see everything. I've sat on 10,000 heads in 1,000 years, and I have never, never, seen anything like what was done to your core. The scarring alone, the residual traces of 100 bindings, you've been unmade and remade, haven't you? The goblins helped me. Yes. I can see their work. Clean. Professional. They always were better healers than wizards, though no wizard would admit it. A pause. Mr. Potter, I should tell you, I am bound by enchantment to keep what I see in a student's mind confidential. Even Dumbledore cannot compel me to reveal it. You are safe here. I appreciate that. Now. To the matter at hand. Sorting you. The hat sounded almost amused. This is going to be interesting. Let's see, courage, certainly. Not the reckless kind, the deliberate kind, the kind that looks at something terrifying and walks toward it anyway. That's Gryffindor. But your mind, my word, your mind, the intelligence, the analytical capacity, the hunger to understand, that's Ravenclaw through and through. And the ambition, not petty ambition, not power for power's sake, but the determination to never, ever be controlled again, to stand on your own terms or not at all, that's Slytherin at its finest. And Hufflepuff? Loyalty. Deep and fierce. Not to institutions or abstractions, but to people who've earned it. The goblins. The Longbottom boy. You've already decided to protect him, haven't you? Harry didn't deny it. You could go anywhere, Mr. Potter. Any house would be strengthened by you. But I'll tell you something I don't tell many students, the house you choose matters less than why you choose it. So. Why? Harry thought about it. He'd discussed this with Ragnarok, run through the political implications of each house, the strategic advantages and disadvantages. Slytherin would make a statement but isolate him from potential allies. Ravenclaw would be comfortable but politically neutral. Hufflepuff would surprise everyone but gain him little. Gryffindor was where Dumbledore would expect him. Where the compulsions would have pushed him. Where the narrative of the boy who lived fit most neatly. And that was exactly why Harry chose it. Gryffindor, he thought. Not because it's expected. Because when the arrest happens tonight, I want to be sitting at the table of the house Dumbledore loved most, wearing the colors he claimed to represent, and I want everyone to see that the boy he chained chose his house freely and will tear down his legacy from inside it. The hat was silent for a moment. Then, that, it said, is the most Slytherin reason anyone has ever chosen Gryffindor. I think I'm in love. Gryffindor, the hat bellowed, and the hall erupted. The Gryffindor table went berserk. The Weasley twins were standing on their bench chanting, "We got Potter. We got Potter." Ron was clapping so hard his hands were red. Hermione was beaming. Neville looked genuinely happy for the first time since Harry had met him. Harry took off the hat, handed it back to McGonagall, and walked to the Gryffindor table. He sat between Ron and Neville, across from Hermione, and nodded to the upper years who were reaching across to shake his hand. "Well done, Harry," Ron said. "Though the hat took ages, what were you talking about in there?" "Philosophy," Harry said, and left it at that. The sorting finished. The last student, Zabini, Blaise, went to Slytherin. McGonagall took the hat and stool away. And Albus Dumbledore rose to his feet. The hall quieted. Every face turned toward the headmaster. Dumbledore stood with his arms wide, his silver beard gleaming, his half-moon spectacles reflecting the candlelight. He radiated benevolence like a furnace radiated heat, warmth and authority and the unshakable confidence of a man who had been in charge so long he'd forgotten what it felt like not to be. "Welcome," Dumbledore said, his voice carrying effortlessly to every corner. "Welcome to a new year at Hogwarts. Before we begin our banquet, I would like to say a few words. And here they are, nitwit. Blubber. Oddment. TW, he didn't finish. The air in the center of the great hall cracked. Not a sound, a sensation, like reality itself developing a fault line. Every candle in the hall flickered. The enchanted ceiling, which had been showing a serene starfield, rippled as if something had punched through it from outside. And then they appeared. 12 goblins. In full war armor. The armor was goblin-forged steel, dark as iron and bright as silver, etched with runes that glowed a faint, angry red. They carried weapons, not the ceremonial kind that decorated Gringotts' walls, but working blades, war axes, maces with heads like clenched fists. They materialized in a perfect circle in the center of the great hall, between the Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw tables, and the sound their boots made when they hit the stone floor was synchronized and absolute. At their head stood Ragnarok. Not in his banker's suit but in the formal dress of a goblin war advocate, dark robes over light armor, the gold chain of his office across his chest, a staff of black iron in his right hand topped with a crystal that pulsed with contained light. He looked nothing like the composed professional Harry had met in the inheritance office. He looked like a general. The hall exploded into chaos. Students screamed. Benches scraped back. Several of the older students drew wands. At the staff table, every professor was on their feet. McGonagall had her wand out in a movement so fast it blurred, Snape had risen like a black-robed pillar, the tiny charms professor had knocked over his goblet, and Dumbledore stood perfectly still. His arms had lowered. His expression had shifted, the twinkle gone, replaced by something sharp and assessing and, for the first time, uncertain. He was looking at Ragnarok with the focus of someone performing very rapid calculations. "Ragnarok," Dumbledore said, and his voice cut through the chaos with effortless authority. The hall quieted, not because the panic had subsided but because when Dumbledore spoke like that, people listened. "This is most unexpected. Gringotts warguards have not entered Hogwarts in 712 years, Ragnarok finished. The occasion then was also an arrest. The word arrest hit the hall like a thunderclap. The remaining noise died instantly. 1,000 eyes moved between the goblin and the headmaster. "I'm sure whatever misunderstanding has occurred can be resolved through proper channels," Dumbledore said, and his voice was warm and reasonable and pitched to de-escalate, and Harry recognized the tone because he'd heard Dumbledore's magical signature resonate in exactly that frequency in the compulsion that had been keyed to his voice. It was the sound of a man who was used to talking his way out of anything. "Perhaps we might discuss this in my office." "There is nothing to discuss," Ragnarok said. "Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, I am Ragnarok, senior war advocate of the Goblin Nation, empowered by the Treaty of Carthage, the revised Accords of 1631, and the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy to enforce Goblin jurisdiction over crimes committed against clients of Gringotts Bank." He struck his staff against the stone floor. The crystal flared white and a scroll of parchment materialized in the air before him, glowing faintly, covered in dense text and bearing the seals of both Gringotts and the International Confederation of Wizards. "You are charged with 107 counts of illegal magical binding, suppression, and siphoning performed upon the person of Harry James Potter, head of the most ancient and noble house of Potter, client of Gringotts since birth. These acts were committed without consent, upon a minor, over a period of 10 years, and constitute a Class 1 violation under Article 17 of the Treaty of Carthage, the magical enslavement of a protected being." The silence was so complete Harry could hear the candles burning. "Additionally," Ragnarok continued, "you are charged with 3 counts of magical assault, specifically, the placement of health-suppressing enchantments designed to stunt growth, reduce immune function, and limit nutritional absorption. You are charged with 21 counts of illegal mind modification, the placement of behavioral compulsions designed to control the subject's social attachments, emotional responses, and cognitive capacity. And you are charged with 2 counts of magical theft, the siphoning of the subject's core energy for purposes yet to be fully determined." Ragnarok lowered the scroll and looked at Dumbledore with black, burning eyes. "You chained a child, Dumbledore. 107 times. You caged his magic, stunted his body, shackled his mind, and stole his power. Under Goblin law, there is no crime more grave. You will answer for it." Dumbledore's face had gone through several transformations during Ragnarok's speech. The initial warmth had faded to careful neutrality, then to something harder, something that looked almost like the real man beneath the performance. His blue eyes had lost their twinkle entirely and what remained was sharp and old and dangerous. "These are serious allegations," Dumbledore said quietly. "And I note they are being made publicly, before students, without prior notification to the Ministry of Magic or the Wizengamot. The Treaty of Carthage does not require ministry notification for a Class 1 arrest. The evidence has been filed simultaneously with the ICW, the British Ministry, and the Wizengamot archives. As of," Ragnarok glanced at the clock tower visible through the hall's high windows, 7 minutes ago, "this information is a matter of public record." "I see." Dumbledore's voice was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that came from a century of practice at controlling situations. "And the evidence?" "Full diagnostic records from Gringotts senior healers. Magical signature identification performed under internationally recognized goblin forensic protocols. Testimony from the subject. Physical evidence of prolonged abuse consistent with the health-suppressing enchantments. It is comprehensive, Dumbledore. It is airtight. And it is done." Dumbledore looked out across the hall. 1,000 faces stared back, students frozen in shock, professors in various states of horror and disbelief, the ghosts hovering motionless near the ceiling. His gaze found the Gryffindor table and moved along it until it found Harry. Harry met his eyes. And dropped the glamour. It was like watching a mask dissolve. The small, scrawny, bespectacled boy flickered and vanished, and in his place sat someone else. Taller. Broader. Sharp-featured and green-eyed and looking at Dumbledore with an expression that was not anger, not hatred, not even accusation. It was certainty. The absolute, unshakable certainty of someone who knows exactly what was done to them and exactly what they're going to do about it. The Potter family ring gleamed on his finger. Dumbledore looked at Harry, at the Real Harry, the Unchained Harry, and for the first time in perhaps 50 years, Albus Dumbledore looked afraid. "Harry, my boy, I am not your boy," Harry said. His voice carried the way Dumbledore's had, not through volume, but through something else, something that made the air listen. "I was never your boy. You made sure of that when you put the first binding on a 15-month-old baby and left him on a doorstep in November to be raised by people who would hurt him. You made sure of it with every compulsion, every block, every chain. I was your project, Dumbledore. Your weapon. Your sacrifice. Whatever you were building me to be, I am not that. Not anymore." Dumbledore closed his eyes. When he opened them, the fear was still there, but so was something else, something that might have been grief, or might have been the recognition that a very old, very intricate plan had just been destroyed beyond repair. "Everything I did," Dumbledore said softly, "I did to protect you. You did it to control me. There's a difference. Ragnarok, I believe you were in the middle of an arrest." Ragnarok's war guards moved. 4 of them flanked the staff table, 2 on each side, cutting off exits. 2 more positioned themselves at the main doors. The remaining 6 advanced on Dumbledore in a formation that was clearly designed to counter a wizard of extreme power, spread wide, weapons charged with anti-magic runes, each one covering a different angle of attack. Dumbledore did not resist. Whether that was because he recognized the futility, or because some part of him accepted what was happening, or because resisting Goblin treaty enforcement in front of 1,000 witnesses would have destroyed whatever remained of his reputation, Harry didn't know and didn't much care. One of the war guards produced a set of shackles. Goblin forged, dark metal, runes crawling across their surface like living things. They went around Dumbledore's wrists with a soft click and the effect was immediate, his magical signature, that enormous swirling presence, dimmed. Not gone, but contained. Leashed. "How does it feel?" Harry didn't say. He didn't need to. The irony was loud enough. "Albus Dumbledore," Ragnarok said formally, "you are remanded to Goblin custody pending trial. Under the Treaty of Carthage, you will be held in Gringotts secure facility and tried before a joint tribunal of Goblin judges and ICW representatives. You have the right to magical legal counsel, which will be arranged upon your request. Do you understand these terms?" "I understand them," Dumbledore said. He looked old, suddenly. Not the vigorous, powerful elder statesman who'd stood to give his speech minutes ago, but an old man in shackles whose plan had just been ripped apart by the people he'd spent a lifetime underestimating. He turned to McGonagall. "Minerva. The school will be fine," McGonagall said. Her voice was steady. Her wand was still in her hand, and Harry noticed she had not pointed it at the goblins. She was pale, and her lips were pressed so thin they'd nearly disappeared, but she was holding herself together with the particular Scottish determination that, Harry suspected, was the real backbone of this school. "The school will be fine, Albus," she repeated, and something in how she said it, not reassuring, not comforting, but final, made Dumbledore flinch more than the shackles had. The war guards escorted Dumbledore to the center of the hall. Ragnarok struck his staff against the floor again and the air cracked, the same reality faultline sensation as before, and a portal opened. Through it, Harry caught a glimpse of dark stone and blue torchlight. Gringotts. Dumbledore paused at the threshold. He looked back at Harry one more time. Their eyes met across the length of the great hall, over the heads of 1,000 stunned students, and something passed between them that Harry couldn't name. Not forgiveness. Not understanding. Something colder and sadder than either. Then Dumbledore stepped through the portal and was gone. Ragnarok turned to face the hall. "Hogwarts staff and students," he said, and his voice carried the weight of a nation behind it. "The Goblin Nation has no quarrel with this school. Our action tonight was directed solely at Albus Dumbledore for crimes committed in his personal capacity. We recognize the authority of the acting head of Hogwarts, whoever that may be, and will cooperate fully with the school's administration during the transition." He looked at McGonagall. She looked back. Something was communicated in that glance, two leaders recognizing each other across a divide of species and history. "I recommend," Ragnarok added, more quietly, "that the acting head commission a full audit of the school's ward structure. There are irregularities that should be addressed." Then the goblins were gone. Portal closed. Air sealed. Candles burning steadily as if nothing had happened. For about 3 seconds, the great hall was perfectly silent. Then everyone started talking at once. Harry sat at the Gryffindor table and let the chaos wash over him. Ron was staring at him with his mouth open, literally open, jaw hanging, apparently unable to reconcile the small bespectacled boy he'd shared a train compartment with and the person sitting next to him now. Hermione's eyes were enormous and her mouth was moving in what Harry suspected was an involuntary recitation of every relevant legal text she'd ever read. Neville was gripping the edge of the table with both hands, but he was looking at Harry with something that wasn't shock. It was hope. "Harry," Ron managed. What? "Long story," Harry said. "You look different." "I was wearing a glamour. I'll explain later." "You were wearing a, how do you know how to, they just arrested Dumbledore, Ron." Harry put a hand on his shoulder. "Breathe. I promise I'll explain everything. But right now, I think McGonagall is about to talk, and I suspect we should listen." McGonagall was indeed standing. She'd moved to the center of the staff table, not to Dumbledore's chair, Harry noticed, which was a smart instinct, and her wand was at her throat, amplifying her voice. "Students." The word cut through the noise like a blade. Silence fell. "I understand that what you have just witnessed is shocking and confusing. I will be honest with you, it is shocking and confusing to me as well. But we are at Hogwarts, and Hogwarts has stood for 1,000 years through shocks far greater than this." Her gaze swept the hall, and Harry saw what made her a great teacher. Not brilliance, not power, but the absolute refusal to let fear win. "As deputy headmistress, I am assuming temporary leadership of the school effective immediately. Classes will begin as scheduled tomorrow. The heads of house will be available in their common rooms this evening for any student who needs to talk. I will address you again at breakfast when I have more information." She paused. "Now. You have had a difficult evening. I suggest we remedy that in the most Hogwarts way I know." She clapped her hands once and the tables filled with food. Mountains of it, roast chicken, shepherd's pie, boiled potatoes, Yorkshire pudding, lamb chops, sausages, vegetables gleaming with butter, gravy boats flowing endlessly. The sheer normalcy of it, the warm smell of food after the cold shock of what had just happened, broke the tension like a wave breaking on a shore. Students started eating, tentatively at first, then with growing appetite. Conversation resumed, hushed and feverish but no longer panicked. McGonagall sat down. Harry saw her hands tremble once before she pressed them flat on the table and stilled them through pure will. At the Gryffindor table, Harry served himself roast chicken and potatoes and ate with genuine hunger. The nutrient potions had restored his appetite over the summer, another thing the blocks had stolen, the simple pleasure of being hungry and eating until you were full. "Are you going to explain?" Hermione asked from across the table, her plate untouched, her eyes bright with the particular intensity of someone who had 1,000 questions and was physically struggling to ask them one at a time. "Not tonight," Harry said. "Tonight, Eat your dinner and try to enjoy your first night at Hogwarts. Tomorrow I'll tell you what I can. But the charges are real. All of them. Gringotts doesn't bluff. 107 bindings, Hermione whispered. On a baby. That's. Harry, that's. I know what it is. She fell silent. Then she picked up her fork and started eating, though Harry could practically hear the questions stacking up behind her eyes like books on a shelf. Ron was quieter than Harry had expected. He ate mechanically, staring at his plate, processing. When he finally spoke, it wasn't the question Harry anticipated. The loyalty compulsions, Ron said. Ragnarok said, compulsions keyed to specific bloodlines. To make you trust certain people. He wasn't looking at Harry. He was looking at the table. Was one of those for the Weasleys? Harry could have lied. Could have deflected. Could have told Ron what he wanted to hear. But the compulsions were gone and Harry was done with manufactured relationships. Yes, Harry said. Ron put his fork down. It's been removed, Harry continued. Everything I feel now is real. And right now, I feel like you're someone I want to get to know properly, without magical interference. If you're up for that. Ron was quiet for a long time. Then he picked his fork back up. Yeah, he said. Yeah, all right. It wasn't a grand moment. No dramatic speeches, no swelling music. Just two boys at a table deciding to be honest with each other. But it was real, and after 107 lies carved into his soul, Harry valued real more than anything. Across the hall, at the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy was watching Harry with an expression that had gone well beyond the calculating look from the train. He looked like someone who had just realized the chessboard was much, much larger than he'd thought, and the pieces were not what they appeared. At the staff table, Severus Snape was staring at Harry with an intensity that bordered on hostile. But it wasn't the simple, dismissive hostility Harry had expected from Ragnarok's briefings. Snape was looking at him the way you'd look at a math problem that was suddenly written in a different language, with frustration, yes, but also with the urgent need to understand. Harry met his gaze briefly. Snape's eyes narrowed. Harry looked away. One thing at a time. The feast wound down. Prefects led the first years toward their common rooms. Percy Weasley, stiff-backed and over-enunciating, guided the Gryffindors up 7 flights of stairs, through corridors that moved, past portraits that whispered and pointed at Harry, to a portrait of a fat lady in a pink dress. Password? Caput Draconis, Percy said, and the portrait swung open. The Gryffindor common room was round and warm, draped in red and gold, with a fire crackling in an enormous hearth and squashy armchairs scattered about. Harry took it in, the warmth, the color, the sense of belonging, and allowed himself to feel it. Not because a compulsion told him to. Because it was genuinely nice to be somewhere that felt like it might, eventually, feel like home. The first-year boys' dormitory was at the top of a spiral staircase. 5 4-poster beds with red velvet curtains. Harry's trunk was at the foot of one, Hedwig's cage beside it, the snowy owl hooted softly when she saw him. Ron took the bed next to Harry's. Neville was across from them. The other 2 boys, Seamus Finnegan and Dean Thomas, were already in their beds, whispering about the arrest. Everyone saw you change, Neville said quietly, pulling his curtains half closed. When you dropped the glamour. Everyone saw. That was the idea. You looked different. Stronger. You looked like you knew exactly what was happening. I did know. Neville was quiet for a moment. Then, very softly, Harry. Those blocks they found on you. Could someone have blocks and not know it? Harry looked at him. Round face, nervous eyes, magic that flickered when it should have shone. Yes, Harry said. And if you want, I can help you find out. Neville's breath caught. He nodded once, quickly, like he was afraid he'd lose his nerve if he waited. Okay, he whispered. Okay. Yes. Please. Harry lay in bed after the lights went out. The dormitory was full of the sounds of boys settling into sleep, rustling sheets, slowing breaths, Ron's faint snoring already starting. Hogwarts hummed around him, the castle's ancient magic a constant presence, and Harry let his awareness expand outward, feeling the wards, the corridors, the sleeping signatures of 1,000 students. This was his first night at Hogwarts. He was 11 years old, the head of an ancient and noble house, and the most powerful young wizard in probably a millennium. The man who had chained him was in goblin custody. The world he'd been born into was about to change. Harry closed his eyes and let his magic settle around him like a blanket. It was warm and vast and entirely his own. Tomorrow, classes would begin. Tomorrow, he'd start learning what Hogwarts could teach him, though he suspected he already knew more than most of the curriculum. Tomorrow, Neville would begin his own journey toward freedom. Tomorrow, the Daily Prophet would hit every doorstep in Wizarding Britain with the biggest headline in a decade. Tomorrow, the world would react. But tonight, for the first time in his life, Harry Potter slept without chains. And his magic sang. Chapter 3, The Unchained Harry woke at 5. Not because of habit, though the Dursleys had trained him to rise before dawn, but because Hogwarts woke him. The castle's magic shifted at that hour, a subtle change in the ambient hum, like a building stretching after a long night. Harry felt it in his bones, a gentle nudge, and his eyes opened to the dim grey light filtering through the dormitory windows. The other boys were still sleeping. Ron was face down with one arm hanging off the bed, making sounds that suggested a sinus condition. Dean and Seamus were silent lumps under their covers. Neville was curled on his side, gripping his blanket with both hands, his face tight even in sleep. Harry dressed quietly, pulled on his robes, and slipped out of the dormitory. The common room was empty at this hour, the fire burned down to embers. Harry crossed it and pushed through the portrait hole. The fat lady grumbled something about early risers but let him through. The corridor beyond was still and grey, torches dimmed to a low burn, portraits dozing in their frames. He needed to send a message to Ragnarok. Harry made his way to the Ollery. He'd memorized the castle layout from Ragnarok's schematics, climbing the winding stair to the drafty tower where hundreds of owls perched and preened. Hedwig spotted him immediately and glided down to his shoulder, nipping his ear with the gentle precision of someone who liked him very much and wanted him to know it. "Morning, girl." Harry stroked her feathers. "I need you to take something to Gringotts. Ragnarok, Senior Account Manager. You know the one." Hedwig hooted in a way that clearly meant of course I do. Harry pulled a small roll of parchment from his robe. He'd written it before bed, using a self-inking quill from the Potter library. The message was brief: arrival successful. Sorting complete. Arrest proceeded as planned. Longbottom confirms suspicion, requesting priority scan authorization. Will establish contact schedule. HJP. He tied it to Hedwig's leg. She launched from his shoulder and arrowed through the open window, a white streak against the grey dawn sky, heading south toward London. Harry leaned against the windowsill and looked out over the grounds. The lake was a dark mirror. The forbidden forest was a wall of black-green shadow. The mountains beyond were just catching the first light, their peaks flushed pink. It was beautiful and ancient, and it was the place where Dumbledore had spent decades building his power base, his network of loyal staff and controlled students and carefully managed narratives. That was over now. But what replaced it mattered. Harry turned from the window and went to find the kitchens. Ragnarok's schematics had included the location of the Hogwarts kitchens, behind a painting of a fruit bowl on the basement corridor. Tickle the pear, it opens. Harry found it easily and stepped into a vast stone room that was a mirror of the great hall above, for long tables in the same positions, fires blazing in enormous hearths, and house elves, dozens of them, maybe 100, already at work preparing breakfast. The nearest elf spotted him and froze. Then all of them froze. 100 pairs of tennis ball eyes fixed on Harry with expressions ranging from shock to something almost reverent. "Harry Potter, sir," one of them squeaked, a small elf even by their standards, wearing a tea towel with the Hogwarts crest. "Harry Potter, sir, is in the kitchens." "Morning," Harry said. "Sorry to intrude. I was hoping for some tea and maybe some toast before breakfast starts." The elves mobilized with an efficiency that would have impressed Steel Fawn. Within 30 seconds, Harry was seated at a small table with a pot of tea, a rack of toast, scrambled eggs, bacon, sausages, fried tomatoes, mushrooms, black pudding, and what appeared to be an entire Victoria sponge cake. "That might be slightly more than I asked for," Harry said. "Harry Potter, sir, is too thin," the small elf declared. "Kipsy can see it. Harry Potter, sir, must eat." Harry ate. The food was excellent and Kipsy watched him with the fierce satisfaction of someone whose life's purpose was being fulfilled. Between bites, Harry asked casual questions: how many elves worked at Hogwarts, how long they'd been here, what they thought of the school. He was really asking something else. The house elves were bound to the castle, which meant they were bound to whoever controlled the castle's core ward matrix. If Dumbledore had been manipulating those wards, the elves would know, or at least, they'd have felt the effects. "Kipsy," Harry said, setting down his fork. "Did you notice anything change in the castle last night? After the goblins left?" Kipsy's ears drooped. She looked around nervously, as if checking for eavesdroppers. The other elves had gone very still. "The castle is lighter today, Harry Potter, sir," Kipsy said carefully. "Something that was pulling is not pulling anymore. Kipsy does not understand it. But the walls feel different. The magic feels different. Like the castle is breathing easier." The siphon. When the goblins cut it, the castle's magic had shifted, no longer being drained and artificially redirected, it was settling back to its natural state. The elves, connected to the castle's magic at a fundamental level, would be the first to notice. "That's a good thing, Kipsy," Harry said. "The castle should feel better from now on." Kipsy's eyes went wide and wet. "Harry Potter, sir, did that? I had help." "But yes." Kipsy burst into tears of apparent joy and had to be comforted by 3 other elves. Harry finished his breakfast, thanked them, and made a mental note that the Hogwarts House Elf Network was a resource Dumbledore had probably used extensively and one that Harry should treat with considerably more respect. He left the kitchens and headed back up toward the Great Hall. Students were beginning to filter down from the towers now, bleary-eyed and the murmuring intensified sharply whenever Harry passed. He'd left the glamour off, no point in it now, every person in the school had seen him drop it at the feast, and his real appearance drew stares that ranged from curious to stunned to openly frightened. He didn't care. Let them stare. Let them see. The Great Hall was half full when Harry entered and sat at the Gryffindor table. Hermione was already there, which didn't surprise him. She struck him as the kind of person who'd been up since 4 reorganizing her book bag. She had the Daily Prophet spread in front of her and her face was a particular shade of pale that suggested the contents were significant. Harry sat across from her. "How bad?" Hermione turned the paper around. The headline took up half the front page in letters 3 inches high: "Dumbledore arrested at Hogwarts sorting feast, Goblin Nation invokes Treaty of Carthage, 107 charges of magical enslavement against boy who lived." Below the headline, 2 photographs jostled for space. One showed Dumbledore in shackles, being led through the goblin portal. Someone had taken it from the Ravenclaw table, judging by the angle. The other was Harry. Post-glamour, sharp-featured, green-eyed, the Potter ring visible on his hand. He didn't remember anyone taking the photo, but wizarding cameras were subtle things. "They've got 4 pages on it," Hermione said. Rita Skeeter wrote the main piece. She's not kind to Dumbledore. There are quotes from the Ministry, from the ICW, from 6 different legal experts. The Minister for Magic issued a statement at midnight saying he was deeply concerned and reviewing the situation, which apparently means he's panicking. And there's a sidebar about you. Harry pulled the paper closer and scanned the article. Skeeter's prose was venomous and sensationalist, but the core facts were accurate. The goblins had clearly provided her with a press packet. The diagnostic results were summarized. The charges were listed. The legal basis was explained, complete with citations from the Treaty of Carthage that Harry recognized from Ragnarok's briefings. It was devastating and it was everywhere, and there was nothing Dumbledore's allies could do about it because the evidence was already public record. The Wizengamot is convening an emergency session this afternoon, Hermione added. Several members are calling for Dumbledore's immediate release on the grounds that Goblin jurisdiction doesn't apply to the Chief Warlock. The Goblins issued a counter-statement at 3 a.m. saying that the Treaty of Carthage supersedes all domestic political appointments and anyone who interferes with the arrest will be considered in violation of international magical law. They were ready for that, Harry said. Harry. Hermione's voice had dropped. This is. I've read about the Treaty of Carthage. It hasn't been invoked for an arrest since 1743. The last time goblins entered Hogwarts under treaty authority was during the Goblin Rebellion of 1314. This isn't just about you, this is a political earthquake. The entire power structure of magical Britain was built around Dumbledore. If he falls, good. I'm not saying it's not good. I'm saying it's enormous. And you're 11. Harry looked at her. Brown eyes, sharp mind, no compulsion between them, just a girl who was brilliant and scared and trying to understand the scale of what she was caught up in. I'm 11, Harry agreed. And for 10 of those years, I was operating at 3% of my magical capacity with my intelligence artificially suppressed, my emotions chemically regulated, and compulsions in my head telling me who to trust and who to hate. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm telling you the context, because you're smart enough to deserve it. Hermione stared at him. Then she pulled the newspaper back, folded it precisely, and tucked it into her bag. What do you need? She asked. Harry almost smiled. The compulsion might have steered him toward her, but it had picked well. Hermione Granger's instinct, when faced with the impossible, was not to panic or deny or bargain. It was to ask what needed doing. Right now. Breakfast. Then Neville and I have somewhere to be before classes start. After that, I need someone who knows wizarding law better than me, and you learn faster than anyone I've ever met. I haven't studied wizarding law. Then study it. I'll give you access to the Potter Library. There are about 400 years of legal texts in there. Hermione's eyes lit up with the specific hunger of someone who'd just been told there was a library she hadn't read yet. Yes. Yes, I can do that. Ron arrived at the table a few minutes later, looking like he'd gotten approximately 2 hours of sleep and had spent the other 6 staring at the ceiling. He sat down heavily, pulled a plate of sausages toward him, and ate 3 of them before speaking. Mum sent a howler, he said. Percy intercepted it. He wouldn't tell me what it said, but he was even more pale than usual, so. A howler? Screaming letter. Mum's famous for them. I reckon well, I don't know what she's thinking. She was always big on Dumbledore. Dumbledore this, Dumbledore that, Dumbledore's the greatest wizard who ever lived. Finding out Ron stopped. Swallowed. My family trusted him, Harry. My dad works at the ministry. My mum, she's always said Dumbledore kept the world safe. If he's been doing this the whole time. The compulsion keyed to your family, Harry said quietly. It was designed to make me attached to you automatically. But it doesn't mean your family was involved. Dumbledore could have keyed it to your bloodline signature without your parents' knowledge. Ron's jaw tightened. But you don't know that. No. I don't. The Goblin investigation will determine who knew what. Right. Ron pushed his plate away. Right. Okay. He was quiet for a moment. I'm still here, Harry. Whatever comes out about my family, I'm here. I chose that on the train, before I knew any of this. I know you did. Neville arrived looking like he hadn't slept at all. He sat next to Ron, took a piece of toast, didn't eat it, and looked at Harry with the quiet desperation of someone waiting for a lifeline. I sent a message to Gringotts, Harry told him, keeping his voice low. Requesting a priority scan authorization for you. We should hear back by mid-morning. Neville's hand trembled. He set the toast down. What if they find, what if I have, then we deal with it. The same way I dealt with mine. You won't be alone in this, Neville. Neville nodded. He picked up the toast and this time managed to eat some of it. Around them, the great hall filled. The noise level rose. Harry could feel the weight of attention on him, hundreds of students and a dozen staff members all aware that the boy at the Gryffindor table was the reason their headmaster was in goblin custody. Some of those looks were sympathetic. Some were hostile. Most were simply bewildered, which was fair enough. At the staff table, McGonagall sat in her usual seat, still not in Dumbledore's chair, and surveyed the hall with the expression of a woman who had been up all night and was running on tea and fury. Snape was beside her, his black eyes moving across the student body with the systematic intensity of a searchlight. When his gaze reached Harry, it stopped. They stared at each other across the hall for a long moment. Then Snape looked away. Professor Flitwick, tiny, white-haired, perched on a stack of cushions, was watching Harry with open fascination and something that might have been professional curiosity. Professor Sprout, the herbology teacher, looked kind and worried. The turbaned man at the end of the table, Quirrell, the defense against the dark arts professor, was staring at his plate and not looking at anyone, which Harry found interesting in a way he couldn't articulate. Quirrell's magical signature was wrong. Harry had noticed it the moment he'd entered the hall. Every other signature in the room was singular, one person, one signature, each as unique as a fingerprint. Quirrell's was doubled. Layered. There was his own magic, thin and stuttering, and beneath it something else, something dark and sharp that pressed against its container like an animal in a cage. Harry filed it away. Not now. Too many variables already. But soon. McGonagall stood and the hall quieted. Good morning. I trust you all slept well. Her dry tone suggested she trusted nothing of the sort. I have spoken with the Board of Governors and the Ministry of Magic this morning. I have been appointed acting headmistress effective immediately, pending the resolution of the current situation. All classes will proceed as scheduled. Normal rules and expectations apply. Hogwarts remains Hogwarts, regardless of who sits in the headmaster's office. She paused and something in her expression softened fractionally. I know many of you have questions. I know many of you are confused and frightened. That is understandable. I encourage you to speak with your heads of house or any professor you trust. We are here for you. Her gaze swept the hall once more. Now, schedules will be distributed by your heads of house. First years, please note that your initial class begins at 9 o'clock. Do try to find the right classroom. The castle can be unhelpful about directions. Schedules appeared on the tables, McGonagall's wand work, crisp and efficient. Harry glanced at his. Monday morning, double potions with the Slytherins. Ron groaned. Potions first. With Snape. On a Monday? What's wrong with Snape? Harry asked, though he knew. He's head of Slytherin. He hates everyone who's not in his house. And he especially hates, well, he hated your dad, apparently. They were in school together. My brothers say he's been taking it out on Gryffindors ever since. Interesting. That's one word for it. Nightmare is another. Harry looked at the schedule again. Double potions. 2 hours with a man who had hated his father and would, presumably, be prepared to hate him on sight. Except Harry no longer looked like a carbon copy of James Potter, the health suppressors had hidden his mother's influence on his features, and without them, the resemblance to James was still there but tempered. Sharper cheekbones. Different jaw. And his eyes, Lily's eyes, were more vivid now, almost luminous. Hedwig arrived during the meal, swooping in through the high windows with a small sealed envelope in her talons. She dropped it in front of Harry and landed on his shoulder, accepting a piece of bacon as payment. Harry opened the envelope. Inside was a short note in Ragnar's precise hand, Longbottom scan authorized. Portable diagnostic kit being sent via secure channel, will arrive in your trunk by noon. Administer at your discretion. If blocks are confirmed, priority extraction to Gringotts healing wing can be arranged within 4 hours. The profit coverage exceeded projections. Skeeter is requesting an exclusive interview, I recommend granting it, on our terms. Dumbledore's allies in the Wisengamot are moving as expected. We are prepared. The Siphon Trail, the second one, the hidden section, requires on-site investigation. I am dispatching a team under diplomatic cover. They will arrive at Hogwarts within the week. Grant them access if you can. Well done, Lord Potter. Harry pocketed the note. He looked at Neville, who was watching him with barely concealed anxiety. Noon, Harry said quietly. We'll know by noon. Neville closed his eyes. His shoulders dropped an inch, releasing tension he'd probably been carrying all night. Thank you, Harry. Don't thank me yet. If they find something, the removal process is not comfortable. I don't care. I've spent my whole life feeling like a squib who got lucky. If there's a reason for that, if someone did this to me, I want to know. The potions classroom was in the dungeons, which suited its professor perfectly. The room was cold, dark, lit by torches that seemed to absorb light rather than cast it, and lined with shelves of glass jars containing things that floated in murky liquid and stared at you when you walked past. Harry took a seat near the front. Ron looked at him as if he'd lost his mind and sat 3 rows back. Hermione, unable to resist proximity to a teacher, sat next to Harry. Neville ended up behind them, hunched over his cauldron with the air of a man approaching the gallows. The Slytherins filed in and took the other side of the room. Malfoy caught Harry's eye and gave him a nod, not friendly, but acknowledging. A step up from yesterday's calculating stare. His bookends, Crabbe and Goyle, settled on either side of him like gargoyles. The door at the back of the room slammed open. Severus Snape entered like a weather system, black robes billowing, pale face set in an expression of general contempt for the universe and everything in it. He swept to the front of the room, turned, and surveyed the class with the air of someone examining a particularly disappointing experiment. There will be no foolish wand-waving or silly incantations in this class, Snape said. His voice was low, silky, and carried a threat the way a sheath carries a blade. As such, I don't expect many of you to appreciate the subtle science and exact art that is potion-making. However, for those select few who possess the predisposition, I can teach you to bewitch the mind and ensnare the senses. I can tell you how to bottle fame, brew glory, and even put a stopper in death. Silence. Nobody breathed. Snape's gaze found Harry. The dark eyes locked on and something moved behind them, recognition, resentment, and the same unsettled confusion Harry had seen at the feast. Ah, Snape said softly. Our new celebrity. The Slytherins smirked. The Gryffindors tensed. Tell me, Potter, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? Harry felt the trap. This was supposed to be a humiliation exercise, ask the famous first-year questions he couldn't possibly answer, knock him down a peg, establish dominance. The old Harry, dampened and suppressed, would have fumbled. Would have shrunk. The draught of living death, Harry said. A powerful sleeping potion. The standard recipe calls for asphodel root powder to grade 4 fineness, but Hector Dagworth Granger's 1911 revision demonstrated that grade 6 produces a more stable emulsion, particularly when paired with saprophyros beans that have been crushed rather than sliced. The smirks died. Snape's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. He pressed harder. "Where, Mr. Potter, would you look if I asked you to find me a bezoar?" The stomach of a goat, specifically, a bezoar, is a calcified mass formed from undigested material. In magical applications, it functions as a universal antidote to most poisons, though its efficacy against magical venoms is limited. Gulpalot's third law provides the theoretical framework for why, though I'd argue his reasoning has gaps. The classroom was very quiet. Hermione, who had been reaching for a raised hand, slowly lowered it. She was staring at Harry with an expression that combined admiration and mild outrage at being beaten to the answer. Snape's jaw tightened. "One more. What is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane?" "They're the same plant, aconitum, also called aconite. Used in several potions, most notably the wolfsbane potion developed by Damocles Belby in 1988, which allows werewolves to retain their minds during transformation. The key ingredient is the aconite flower rather than the root, despite what most standard texts say. Belby's original notes, which are in the Potter family library, specify the flower petals harvested under a waning moon." Something cracked in Snape's expression. Not anger, though anger was there, simmering beneath the surface. Something else. Harry recognized it because he'd spent weeks learning to read people without compulsions telling him what to feel. Snape was looking at him and seeing something he hadn't expected. Not James Potter's arrogant son, swaggering in on fame and privilege. Something sharper. Something that knew things it shouldn't and spoke with a precision that was more Lily than James. That was the crack. Right there. Lily. 10 points to Gryffindor, Snape said, and the words sounded like they were being extracted with pliers. He turned away sharply. "Well? Why aren't you all writing this down?" Quills scrambled. Snape launched into the lesson, a basic cure for boils, first-year standard, and Harry followed the instructions with easy competence. His potion was textbook perfect within 40 minutes. Hermione's was nearly as good, which seemed to simultaneously please and irritate her. Neville's was a disaster, his hands shaking, his confidence shot, the dampened magic making everything harder than it should have been, and Harry stepped in twice to quietly correct his mistakes before Snape noticed. But Snape noticed everything. "Longbottom," Snape said, appearing behind Neville like a particularly malevolent shadow. "Did I or did I not say to add the porcupine quills after removing the cauldron from the fire?" Neville went white. His mouth opened and nothing came out. "It's a common error," Harry said, not looking up from his own cauldron. "The instructions in Arsenius Jigger's standard text are ambiguous on the sequencing. Most professional brewers add the quills at reduced heat rather than full removal, which achieves the same result with better consistency." Snape turned to Harry. The look on his face was extraordinary, fury at being contradicted, warring with the undeniable fact that Harry was right, warring with whatever internal struggle the resemblance to Lily was triggering. "I do not recall asking for your opinion, Potter." "You didn't. But Neville's potion is salvageable if he adds 3 drops of salamander blood now, which will neutralize the premature quill reaction. Would you rather he learn something or just lose points?" The dungeon was silent. Every student was staring. Malfoy had actually put down his stirring rod to watch. Snape stared at Harry for a long, dangerous moment. Then he looked at Neville. "Add the salamander blood, Longbottom. 3 drops. Do try not to melt your cauldron." He swept away. Neville's hands were shaking so badly that Harry had to guide the dropper for him, but the potion stabilized, turned from angry red to the correct pale blue, and Neville let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for about 6 years. "How did you know that?" Neville whispered. "I spent a month reading every potion's text in my family's library. The salamander blood trick is in Libatius Borgia's advanced notes. It's not in the school books because the school books are outdated." "I meant, how did you know to stand up to him like that?" Harry looked at Neville. At the fear in his eyes, the resignation, the assumption that authority figures would always be cruel and you just had to take it. Because nobody should have to sit there and take it, Harry said. Not from him. Not from anyone. Neville stared at him. Then he looked down at his salvaged potion, pale blue, gently steaming, correct, and something shifted in his face. Not confidence, not yet. But the first distant cousin of it. They ate lunch in the Great Hall, roast beef and Yorkshire pudding, the Hogwarts kitchens apparently operating on the assumption that students needed to be fed like prize cattle, and Harry watched the clock. Noon. Ragnar's diagnostic kit should be arriving. I need to go to my trunk, Harry told the others. Neville, come with me. They went up to the dormitory. Harry opened his trunk, the goblin-enchanted one, which contained a great deal more than its external dimensions suggested, and found the diagnostic kit waiting on top of his spare robes. It was a flat leather case about the size of a book, stamped with the Gringotts seal, and when Harry opened it he found a single crystal sphere, a sheet of parchment covered in goblin runes, and a note from the lead healer. Place the sphere in the subject's hands. Activate with the command word Reveillot. The sphere will perform a basic core scan, less detailed than a full diagnostic but sufficient to detect the presence of bindings, blocks, or foreign magical interference. Results will appear on the parchment. If positive, contact us immediately. Harry handed the sphere to Neville. Hold this. Both hands. Neville took it. The crystal was cool and clear, about the size of a tennis ball. He held it and looked at Harry with an expression that was trying very hard to be brave. Reveillot, Harry said. The sphere pulsed. Once, twice, then it glowed a deep, ugly orange. Not the warm orange of firelight but the sick orange of infection, of wrongness, of something that should not be there. Neville gasped. The glow intensified, shadows moving inside the crystal like things swimming in murky water. Then, abruptly, it went dark. Harry looked at the parchment. Goblin runes were writing themselves across the surface in sharp, precise strokes. He couldn't read all of them, his gobbledygook was functional but not fluent, but he recognized the key indicators. Bindings detected, 31. Suppression blocks, 18. Compulsion clusters, 7. Intelligence dampeners, 4. Health suppressors, 2. Siphons, 0. No siphons. That was something. Whoever had blocked Neville wasn't stealing his magic, just suppressing it. But 31 bindings on a child was still a crime that would make goblin war advocates sharpen their blades. Neville, Harry said. He kept his voice steady, calm, the way Ragnar had spoken to him in that first meeting. You have 31 bindings on your core. Neville didn't cry. Harry had expected tears. Neville struck him as someone who cried easily, not from weakness but from a lifetime of being overwhelmed, but instead, something hardened in his round face. His jaw set. His eyes, which were usually wide and darting, went still. 31, Neville repeated. 18 suppression blocks. 7 compulsion clusters. 4 intelligence dampeners. 2 health suppressors. The signature is different from mine, it's not Dumbledore. Then who? The goblins will need to identify it. A full diagnostic at Gringotts will pull the signature and match it. Neville set the crystal sphere down on his bed. His hands were trembling but his voice was steady when he spoke. My gran always said I was nearly a squib. That I barely showed any magic as a child. My great-uncle Algy dropped me out of a window when I was 8 to try to force my magic out, and it worked. I bounced, but, he stopped. His jaw worked. They dropped me out of a window, Harry. Because they thought I was almost a muggle. And the whole time, someone had just turned me off. Yes. My parents were powerful. Both of them. Aurors. They fought Voldemort himself and survived. And I've been stumbling through life barely able to cast a Lumos because someone decided I shouldn't have my magic. Yes. Neville stood up. He was shaking, his whole body, not just his hands, but it wasn't fear. Harry recognized it because he'd felt it himself, in that first meeting with Ragnarok when the truth had landed. It was rage. The specific, personal, world-altering rage of someone who has just discovered that their suffering was not natural, not deserved, not inevitable, but inflicted. "Get me to Gringotts," Neville said. Harry sent Hedwig with an emergency message. By 2 o'clock, a reply arrived. The goblins could receive Neville at 6 that evening via a secure portal that would be established in the Room of Requirement, a hidden room on the 7th floor that the goblins, apparently, knew about and could access through the castle's ward matrix. The Room of Requirement? Hermione said when Harry explained. She'd joined them in the dormitory, social conventions about boys' rooms apparently less important than the crisis at hand. "I've read about it in Hogwarts, a history. Well, it's mentioned in a footnote. A room that appears when you need it and configures itself to whatever purpose you require. But the book says it hasn't been reliably located in centuries. The goblins built the ward matrix that the room connects to," Harry said. "They know where everything is in this castle. Probably better than the wizards do. That's slightly unsettling. Only if you're a wizard who's been telling yourself goblins are lesser for 1,000 years. If you're a goblin, it's just good record-keeping." Hermione gave him a look that was half admiration and half wariness. "You really trust them? They're the only ones who told me the truth. Everyone else, Dumbledore, the Ministry, the entire magical world, either lied to me or didn't bother looking." The goblins looked. And then they acted. "Trust is earned, Hermione. They earned it." Afternoon classes were charms with Professor Flitwick. The tiny professor stood on his stack of books and beamed at the first years with genuine enthusiasm, and Harry liked him immediately, not because of a compulsion, but because Flitwick's magical signature was clear and bright and joyful in a way that matched his personality perfectly. There was no deception in him. "Welcome, welcome. First-year charms, the foundation of practical magic. We'll be starting with the levitation charm today, though mastery won't be expected for several weeks. The incantation is Wingardium Leviosa, swish and flick, please, swish and flick." Harry raised his feather on the first attempt. Not a wobble, not a tentative float, the feather shot up smoothly, hovered at exactly the height Harry intended, and stayed there, rock solid, as if it had been nailed to the air. Flitwick nearly fell off his books. "Oh. Oh my. Mr. Potter, that is exceptional. First attempt, perfect form, perfect control, I haven't seen, in 30 years of teaching." He stopped, collected himself, and gave Harry a look of pure professional delight. 10 points to Gryffindor. "And would you mind terribly, could you levitate the desk as well? Just to see." Harry levitated the desk. And the chair next to it. And Flitwick's stack of books, which he reassembled in midair in a neater configuration while the tiny professor clapped his hands and made sounds of academic ecstasy. Hermione got her feather up on the 3rd try, which was still exceptional for a first year and which she seemed determined to feel competitive about. Ron's feather caught fire, which Harry suspected was less about incompetence and more about distraction. Ron kept glancing at Harry with an expression that mixed awe with something more complicated. After class, Flitwick asked Harry to stay behind. "Mr. Potter," the little professor said, once the other students had filed out. "I was your mother's teacher. Lily Evans. She was the most naturally gifted charms student I ever taught." He looked up at Harry with bright, knowing eyes. "You have her talent. Amplified considerably, if I'm not mistaken." "Thank you, Professor. I also want you to know, what was revealed last night, about the bindings. I had no knowledge of it. None of the staff did, as far as I'm aware. If I had known." He trailed off. His small face was tight with something that looked like guilt, not the guilt of complicity, but the guilt of someone who should have seen and didn't. "I should have noticed. A talent like yours, suppressed to that degree, there should have been signs." "I should have, you couldn't have known," Harry said. "The blocks were designed to be invisible to standard magical detection. Only goblin diagnostic magic could find them. Dumbledore was very thorough. That does not comfort me as much as you might hope. Flitwick shook his head. I was a dueling champion, Mr. Potter. I have fought dark wizards and won. And I did not see what was happening to a child in my own school. He straightened on his stack of books. If there is anything I can do, anything at all, please ask. Actually, Harry said, there is something. You're half goblin, aren't you? Flitwick blinked. On my mother's side, yes. It's not something I typically. The goblins are sending a team to investigate something in the castle's ward structure. Ragnarok mentioned they'd benefit from a staff liaison, someone who understands both goblin and wizard magical systems. Would you be willing? Flitwick stared at him for a long moment. Then a smile spread across his face, not the cheerful teaching smile, but something fiercer. Lord Potter, he said, it would be my genuine pleasure. At 6 o'clock, Harry led Neville to the 7th floor. The corridor was empty, most students were at dinner, which Harry had deliberately timed for, and Harry paced 3 times in front of the blank stretch of wall opposite the tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy, thinking clearly about what he needed. A door appeared. Plain wood, iron-banded, with a goblin rune carved into its surface that glowed faintly gold. Through here, Harry said. Neville looked at the door, squared his shoulders, and walked through. The room of requirement had configured itself as a mirror of the Gringotts healing chamber, stone walls, blue torchlight, a padded chair at the center, crystal arrays already in position. Ragnarok stood waiting, flanked by the lead healer and 2 assistants. A portal shimmered behind them, a window into the deeper halls of the bank. Mr. Longbottom, Ragnarok said. I am Ragnarok. Lord Potter has told me about your situation. Shall we begin? Neville looked at the chair, the crystals, the goblins. He was terrified, Harry could see it in every line of his body. But he walked to the chair and sat down. Begin, Neville said. The diagnostic took 15 minutes. It was more thorough than the portable kit, the full resonance array, the holographic projection, the complete mapping of Neville's core. And the result was worse than the preliminary scan had suggested. Neville's core was large. Not as large as Harry's, few were, but significantly above average, consistent with the Longbottom bloodline. And it was wrapped in 31 bindings that were, in some ways, crueler than what had been done to Harry. Where Harry's blocks had been systematic and comprehensive, the work of a powerful wizard executing a deliberate plan, Neville's were rougher, more haphazard. Some were layered on top of each other, interfering with each other, creating cascading effects that went beyond what any individual binding was designed to do. The intelligence dampeners, in particular, were brutal, not the subtle throttling that had been applied to Harry, but blunt instruments that suppressed entire categories of cognitive function. Memory. Spatial reasoning. Confidence. The compulsions were simpler too, not behavioral targeting but broad emotional suppression, fear amplification, self-doubt reinforcement, anxiety triggers keyed to magical performance. Someone had wanted Neville to be afraid of his own magic. Not just suppressed, actively terrified of it. The signature, the healer said, her voice tight. It is, unusual. Not a single caster. Multiple signatures are present, but they are consistent with a single origin, a magical artifact rather than a direct casting. An artifact? Harry asked. Someone used an object to place these? That is the indication, yes. The signatures are diffuse, consistent with ambient exposure rather than targeted spell work. As if Mr. Longbottom was exposed to the artifact repeatedly over a period of years. Could you identify the artifact? With more analysis, possibly. The signature has characteristics consistent with, she hesitated, a wand. The room went very still. A wand, Neville said. Someone used a wand on me. Not used, exposed. If you were given a wand that was not compatible with your core, one whose magical signature actively conflicted with yours, prolonged use could create binding-like effects. Suppression. Dampening. Interference patterns. Neville's face went very pale. My gran gave me my dad's wand. She said I should use it. For him. To honor his memory. Harry looked at Ragnar. The wand was not chosen for you by Ollivander? Ragnar asked. No. Gran said I didn't need to go. She said Dad's wand would be proud to serve me. The healer ran another scan, this time focused on the binding signatures. After several minutes, she looked up. The wand is the primary vector. Approximately 24 of the 31 bindings are consistent with prolonged use of an incompatible wand. The remaining 7 are older, placed in early childhood, before the wand was introduced. She paused. Those 7 carry a different signature. Direct casting, not artifact exposure. The caster is, she told them. Neville's face crumpled. Just for a moment. Then it rebuilt itself, harder than before. Harry didn't ask who. He could see from Ragnar's expression that the goblin already knew and that it was information best handled carefully. The wand needs to go, Harry said. Neville, you need a proper wand, one that chose you. Gran will, Neville. Harry put a hand on his shoulder. Your grandmother made a decision based on sentiment that has been actively hurting you for years. Whether she knew that or not, and the goblins will determine that, it doesn't change what needs to happen. You need your own wand. Neville was quiet for a long time. Then he reached into his robe and pulled out his father's wand. He held it in his palm and looked at it, a piece of his father, the man he'd never known, the hero his grandmother never let him forget he wasn't living up to. I'm sorry, Dad, Neville whispered. He set the wand on the table. The goblins began the removal process that evening. The incompatible wand bindings were easier to remove than Harry's had been, less deeply rooted, more mechanical than malicious, and the healers cleared 14 of them in the first session. They scheduled Neville for daily sessions through the Room of Requirement portal, same protocol Harry had followed over the summer. When they returned to the Gryffindor common room at 9, Neville was walking differently. Straighter. His magic, still partially blocked but already stronger than it had been that morning, was pulsing with a steadier rhythm. His eyes were clearer. Hermione and Ron were waiting by the fire. Hermione had the Potter library trunk open beside her and was surrounded by legal texts, parchment covered in notes, and the slightly manic expression of someone who had found her element. I've been reading about the Treaty of Carthage, she said before they'd even sat down. Harry, do you know how broad the Goblin Jurisdiction Clause actually is? It covers any crime against a Gringotts client detected within Goblin wards, but there's a subsection, Article 17, Paragraph 9, that extends jurisdiction to ongoing crimes. Meaning if the effects of the crime are still active when detected, the goblins can claim jurisdiction even if the original act occurred outside their wards. That's how they're holding Dumbledore, Harry said. The blocks were placed at the Dursleys, but they were still active when I walked into Gringotts. Right, but the implications, it means any student who's been blocked or bound and walks through Gringotts doors falls under their protection. If what was done to Neville was detected by a goblin diagnostic kit authorized by Gringotts under the same treaty framework, Harry finished. Yes. The goblins can act. Hermione stared at him. You already knew all this. Ragnar has been planning this for months. Every legal angle, every political contingency. The goblins don't improvise. They prepare. I'm starting to feel like I should have been sorted into Ravenclaw just to keep up with you. You're exactly where you need to be. Tuesday brought Transfiguration with McGonagall, and Harry discovered that the acting headmistress was a teacher of extraordinary caliber. Her expectations were mercilessly high, her instructions were crystalline, and when she demonstrated the day's lesson, turning a match into a needle, the wand work was so precise it was like watching a surgeon operate. Transfiguration is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts, she told the class. Anyone messing around in my class will leave and not come back. You have been warned. Harry turned his match into a needle before she finished speaking. Then, because the exercise felt insufficient, he turned it back into a match, then into a needle again, then into a small silver pin with a griffin's head that matched his family ring. McGonagall stood over his desk and looked at the pin for a very long time. "Mr. Potter. Please see me after class." The other students filed out, casting nervous glances back. Ron mouthed, "Good luck," and Hermione lingered until McGonagall's raised eyebrows sent her scurrying. Alone in the classroom, McGonagall sat on the edge of her desk and regarded Harry with an expression that was nothing like her teaching face. This was the woman underneath, tired, troubled, and grappling with something that went deeper than academic concern. "That pin," she said, "represents a level of transfiguration control that I would expect from a 6th or 7th year student. Possibly a gifted NEWT candidate." "Yes, Professor. The blocks that were removed from you, the intelligence dampeners, the magical suppressors, without them, this is your natural level." "I don't know what my natural level is yet. The blocks were only fully removed 2 weeks ago. My magic is still settling." McGonagall absorbed this. Her fingers were tight on the edge of the desk. "I have known Albus Dumbledore for over 40 years, she said quietly. "He recruited me to teach here. He was my mentor. He was, I believed, the greatest wizard of our age and a fundamentally good man." She paused. "I am finding it very difficult to reconcile that belief with what was done to you. Good people can do terrible things when they convince themselves the cause is just. You sound like you've thought about this a great deal." "I've had a lot of time to think. 10 years in a cupboard under the stairs, and then a month with goblins who don't believe in sugarcoating." McGonagall flinched. Actually flinched, a visible contraction of her entire body. "A cupboard? My bedroom at the Dursleys. From age 1 until the Hogwarts letters started arriving. Then they moved me to my cousin's second bedroom, because the letters were addressed to the cupboard under the stairs and they were afraid someone would find out. I told him," McGonagall whispered. Her face had gone white. "I told Albus, the day he left you there, I sat on that wall all day and watched them. I told him they were the worst sort of muggles. I told him," she stopped. Her hand came up to her mouth and she held it there for a moment, pressing hard, as if physically holding something back. "Professor," Harry said. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty. You didn't put those blocks on me. You didn't leave me in that cupboard. But you can do something now. You're running this school. Dumbledore spent decades shaping Hogwarts around his agenda, controlling information, manipulating students, using the wards for his own purposes. I don't know the full extent of it. I don't think anyone does yet. But you're in a position to find out and to fix it." McGonagall lowered her hand. The guilt was still there, it would be there for a long time, Harry suspected, but so was something else. The iron core that had made her a Gryffindor, that had made her Dumbledore's deputy, that would, Harry hoped, make her something better than either. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "Ragnarok is sending a team to investigate the castle's ward structure. Specifically, the second siphon trail, the one that leads to something hidden. Flitwick has agreed to liaise. I need you to authorize their access and ensure the rest of the staff doesn't interfere." "Done. I also need you to review the school's intake records. Specifically, I want to know if any other students have shown signs of magical suppression, underperformance relative to family magical history, unexplained health issues, behavioral anomalies." McGonagall's eyes sharpened. "You think there are more? Neville has 31 blocks. I had 107. If Dumbledore did this to me, and someone else did it to Neville, then it's not isolated. It's a pattern. And a pattern means there could be others. I'll review the records tonight. One more thing. Quirrell. Professor Quirrell. His magical signature is wrong. Doubled. There's something else attached to him, something that isn't him. I don't know what it is, but it's dark, and it's powerful, and it's hiding. McGonagall stared at him. You can read magical signatures. It's a recent development. Mr. Potter, Harry, you understand that what you're describing is an extraordinarily rare ability? Magical signature perception at that level of detail is documented in perhaps a dozen witches and wizards in recorded history. The goblin healers said something similar. My core is unusual. That may be the understatement of the century. McGonagall stood. She looked like a woman who had been handed a very heavy burden and had decided to carry it anyway, because that was what she did. I will look into Quirrell. Discreetly. Thank you, Professor. And Harry? She met his eyes. Hers were bright and fierce and very, very tired. I cannot undo what was done to you. I cannot give you back those 10 years. But I can promise you this, as long as I am running this school, no one will touch you. No one will bind you. No one will cage what you are. You have my word. Harry believed her. Not because of a compulsion. Because Minerva McGonagall said it like she meant it, and she was the kind of person who did. That means more than you know, Professor. He left her classroom and walked through corridors that hummed with ancient magic, past portraits that watched him with whispered curiosity, upstairs that shifted beneath his feet like the castle was rearranging itself to make his path easier. Because it was. Harry could feel it, the castle's awareness, the old intelligence in the stones, responding to him the way it hadn't responded to anyone in a very long time. The wards recognized his magical signature. Not because of the siphon, that was gone, but because Harry's magic, at full power, resonated with the castle at a fundamental frequency. The founders had built Hogwarts on a ley line, and Harry's core was large enough to feel that ley line, to interact with it, to draw on it if he needed to. He stopped in an empty corridor on the 7th floor and put his hand against the wall. The stone was warm. The magic beneath it pulsed. I see you, Harry thought. I know what was done to you. I know he used you. Used me to feed you, and used you for something else. Something hidden. We're going to find it. The wall pulsed once under his hand. Not words, the castle didn't think in words. But understanding. Agreement. Welcome. Harry took his hand away and kept walking. Tomorrow, the Goblin investigation team would arrive. Tomorrow, Neville's second session would remove more blocks. Tomorrow, Hermione would brief him on the Wisengamot emergency session results. Tomorrow, the Daily Prophet would print whatever Ragnarok had fed Rita Skeeter for the next news cycle. But tonight, as Harry returned to the Gryffindor common room to find Ron dozing by the fire, Hermione buried in legal texts, and Neville practicing a Lumos charm that, for the first time in his life, actually worked, the light bright and steady in his. Tonight, Harry sat down among people who were choosing to be there, in a castle that was choosing to welcome him, in a world that was beginning to change. And the castle hummed around him, warm and ancient and patient, as if it had been waiting a very long time for someone to come along and set things right. Down in the dungeons, Severus Snape sat in his office and stared at a photograph he kept in a locked drawer. A girl with red hair and green eyes, laughing at something outside the frame. Lily Evans, age 15. He looked at the photograph. Then he looked at the Potter Boys Potions essay, first assignment, submitted that afternoon, and so comprehensively brilliant that Snape had read it 3 times looking for something to criticize and found nothing. The boy had Lily's eyes. He'd always had Lily's eyes, everyone said so, it was practically a greeting, but Snape had never seen it before. He'd looked at Harry Potter and seen James, always James, the arrogant swaggering bully who'd stolen the only person Snape had ever loved. But the blocks were off now. The compulsions, the dampeners, the suppressions, all gone. And what was left wasn't James Potter's son. What was left was Lily's. The intelligence. The precision. The quiet, absolute refusal to accept cruelty as normal. The boy had defended Longbottom. had looked Snape in the eye and said nobody should have to sit there and take it with a conviction that hit Snape like a fist, because it was exactly what Lily would have said. Snape put the photograph away. Locked the drawer. Sat in the dark and cold of his dungeon office and felt something he hadn't felt in 10 years crack open inside his chest. It felt, he thought, rather like shame. Chapter 4, The trial beneath the Goblin investigation team arrived on Thursday morning, walking through a portal that opened in the room of requirement with the quiet efficiency of soldiers entering a forward position. There were 6 of them, 3 ward breakers in light armor carrying instruments Harry didn't recognize, 2 archivists with leather cases full of crystal recording devices, and the team leader, a goblin named Ironclaw who had the build of a blacksmith and the eyes of a chess grandmaster. Flitwick met them at the door. He'd changed out of his usual cheerful teaching robes into something more practical, dark fabric, close-fitting, with goblin rune-stitching along the sleeves that Harry recognized as ward-sensing enchantments. The half-goblin heritage that Flitwick usually downplayed was visible now in his bearing, the way he greeted Ironclaw with a precise nod and a phrase in gobbledygook that made the team leader's eyebrows rise in what might have been approval. "Lord Potter," Ironclaw said, turning to Harry. "Ragnarok sends his regards. The trial date has been set, 10 days from now, at Gringotts, before a joint tribunal. Your testimony will be required. I'll be there. The Wizengamot attempted to block it yesterday. Emergency motion to transfer jurisdiction to the Ministry. It failed. The ICW ruled that the Treaty of Carthage takes precedence. Dumbledore's allies are running out of moves. How is he?" Ironclaw gave him a look that suggested the question was unexpected. "Cooperative. He has requested legal counsel and been provided it. He has not attempted to escape, though the restraints would prevent it regardless. He has asked to speak with you." "No. That was Ragnarok's recommendation as well." Ironclaw turned to Flitwick. "Professor. Shall we begin?" They began. Harry accompanied them for the first hour, watching as the ward breakers mapped the castle's magical infrastructure with instruments that projected 3-dimensional schematics into the air, glowing lines of force, nodes of concentrated power, the layered enchantments of 1,000 years made visible and navigable. Hogwarts was staggeringly complex. The Founder's original ward matrix was the deepest layer, a skeleton of raw magical architecture that everything else was built upon. Above that, centuries of additions, protections, concealment charms, climate controls, the self-repairing enchantments that kept the castle from crumbling, the awareness matrix that gave the building its strange semi-sentience. And threaded through all of it, like ivy through stonework, was Dumbledore's work. The ward breakers identified it within minutes. Modifications to the original matrix, made over a period of decades, subtle enough to be invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for them with goblin-level precision. Monitoring enchantments on student dormitories. Behavioral tracking charms on the corridors. A network of loyalty compulsions woven into the very walls of the headmaster's office, designed to make anyone who entered feel trust and deference toward the room's occupant. He bugged the entire castle, Harry said, staring at the schematic. More than that, Ironclaw replied, tracing a line of force that ran from the headmaster's office down through the castle's core. He integrated himself into the ward matrix. These modifications give the headmaster, specifically Dumbledore, the enchantments are keyed to his signature, the ability to monitor the location and basic emotional state of every person inside the wards. He could feel where you were, what you were feeling, whether you were afraid or angry or calm, at any moment of any day. "That's how he always knew everything," Flitwick murmured. His small face was tight. "We used to joke about it. Dumbledore always knows. We thought it was wisdom. Experience. Some special insight that came from being the greatest wizard of the age." He looked at the monitoring network mapped in glowing lines before them. It was surveillance. "The second siphon trail," Harry said. "Where does it lead?" Ironclaw worked with his team for another 20 minutes, tracing the energy pathway that Harry's stolen magic had been feeding. It ran from the general ward matrix, where the first siphon had terminated, down through the castle's foundations, past the dungeons, past the sub-basement levels, into a section of the magical infrastructure that was sealed behind protections so dense they showed up on the schematic as a solid block of white. There, Ironclaw said, pointing to the block. Third sub-level, beneath the North Tower Foundation. The protections are Dumbledore's work, layered over something older. Much older. Whatever he's hiding, it was here before he was. He found it and built a cage around it. Can you get through? Given time. These are serious protections, blood wards, intention locks, a rather elegant deadman switch that would destroy whatever's inside if the protections are breached incorrectly. Ironclaw studied the schematic with professional appreciation. Dumbledore was many things, but he was not a careless enchanter. This will take 2, perhaps 3 days to dismantle safely. Do it. An iron claw, the deadman switch. If it's triggered, what happens? Based on the energy signatures, the contents would be consumed by fiendfire. Total destruction. So whatever's inside, he wanted the option to destroy it utterly if someone got close. Or if he decided it needed destroying. The trigger is keyed to his signature. He could activate it remotely. Harry thought about that. An object, hidden deep beneath Hogwarts, fed by Harry's stolen magic, protected by the most dangerous wards Dumbledore could construct, with a self-destruct mechanism built in. Something Dumbledore wanted to keep secret, and keep the option to obliterate if necessary. Something he was afraid of. Harry left the investigation team to their work and went to class. The contrast was almost absurd, from goblin wardbreakers and hidden chambers to a history of magic lesson delivered by a ghost so boring that he appeared to have put himself to sleep. Professor Binns droned about goblin rebellions without apparent irony, given that actual goblins were currently dismantling his employer's secret surveillance network 3 floors below. Harry used the time productively. He pulled out parchment and began drafting his testimony for the trial. The facts were straightforward: 107 bindings, placed without consent, on a minor, by a known caster. The evidence was documented, the signature identified, the effects catalogued. But Harry knew that a trial wasn't just about facts. It was about narrative. And the narrative mattered because Dumbledore's defense would not be denial. You couldn't deny a magical signature, it would be justification. Everything I did to protect you. Harry had been thinking about what Dumbledore meant by that. Not the surface meaning, not the grandfatherly concern that Dumbledore projected like a Patronus. The real meaning. The strategic meaning. Why would someone bind a child's magic, suppress his intelligence, regulate his emotions, and siphon his power? What purpose did a weak, confused, compliant Harry Potter serve that a strong, brilliant, free one didn't? The answer was control. Obviously. But control toward what? The prophecy. Ragnarok had mentioned it, a prophecy that linked Harry to Voldemort, the details of which were sealed in the Department of Mysteries. Harry didn't know the exact wording, but Dumbledore's actions painted a picture. He wanted Harry dependent, manageable, loyal to the right people, hostile to the wrong ones, brave enough to fight but not smart enough to question why he was fighting or how the fight had been arranged. Dumbledore wasn't just protecting Harry. He was programming him. Building a weapon that would point where aimed and not ask questions. The realization sat in Harry's chest like a cold stone. He finished his testimony draft during herbology, while Neville, whose second block removal session had cleared another 12 bindings the previous evening, repotted a fanged geranium with hands that no longer shook. Neville was changing. Not as dramatically as Harry had. 31 bindings was terrible, but it wasn't 107, and the incompatible wand had been doing most of the damage, but the change was visible to anyone paying attention. He stood straighter. His voice was firmer. In herbology, where he'd always shown aptitude, the difference was remarkable. His magic flowed into the plants he worked with like water finding its level, coaxing growth and health with an instinct that Professor Sprout noticed immediately. Mr. Longbottom. Sprout exclaimed, watching Neville's geranium not only accept repotting without biting anyone but actually lean toward his hands like a cat seeking affection. That's extraordinary work. Have you been practicing? Neville looked at Harry. Harry gave him the faintest nod. I've been getting some help, Professor, Neville said. With my magic. Sprout's expression softened. She'd read the prophet. Everyone had. She looked at Neville with the particular attention of a teacher who was suddenly wondering what else she'd missed. Well, she said gently, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. The new wand arrived Friday morning. Ragnarok had arranged it through a channel that bypassed Ollivander's, not because Ollivander wasn't skilled, but because the goblin wandsmiths had a tradition of crafting wands for those whose magic had been damaged and needed a particularly sensitive match. The wand came in a case of dark wood, lined with velvet, and when Neville opened it in the dormitory his breath caught. Cherry wood. 13 inches. Unicorn hair core. The wood was a warm reddish-brown, smooth as silk, and the moment Neville's fingers closed around it, the room filled with warmth. Not temperature, magic. A golden glow rose from the wand's tip and expanded outward, and Neville's face transformed. The anxiety, the self-doubt, the perpetual flinch, all of it fell away, just for a moment, and what was left was a boy feeling his own magic answer him properly for the first time in his life. Oh, Neville whispered. The glow faded. Neville held the wand like something sacred and looked at Harry with eyes that were bright and wet and absolutely certain. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me. Cast something. Neville raised the wand. Lumos. The light that erupted from the tip was blinding. Not the feeble flicker he'd been producing all week with his father's wand, not even the steady glow he'd managed after the first round of block removals. This was a beam, white gold, powerful, illuminating every corner of the dormitory and casting sharp shadows on the walls. Ron, who'd been tying his shoes, fell off his bed. Bloody hell, Neville. Neville stared at his own wand. At the light pouring from it. At his hand, steady and sure around a wand that was his, that had chosen him, that sang with his magic instead of fighting it. I'm not a squib, Neville said. Not to anyone in particular. Just to the universe. To every person who'd ever looked at him with pity or disappointment or the particular resigned tolerance reserved for children who don't measure up. I was never a squib. No, Harry said. You never were. Saturday brought 2 developments. The first, Ragnarok's team cracked the outer layer of protections on the sealed chamber beneath the North Tower. Ironclaw reported that the inner defenses were more complex than anticipated. The Deadman switch was integrated into the ward structure in a way that made it impossible to simply remove, requiring instead a careful rerouting of the trigger mechanism. 2 more days, he estimated. Maybe 3. The second, Draco Malfoy requested a meeting. Harry found the note tucked into his potions textbook after Saturday morning study session in the library, a small square of expensive parchment, folded precisely, bearing a single line in elegant handwriting, the trophy room, 3 p.m. I'll be alone. DM Harry went. Not because he trusted Malfoy, but because he was curious, and because Ragnarok had taught him that information was the most valuable currency in any economy. The trophy room was on the 3rd floor, a long gallery lined with glass cases displaying cups, shields, plaques, and medals accumulated over a millennium. Dusty afternoon light filtered through high windows. Malfoy was standing by a case near the far wall, hands clasped behind his back, studying a Quidditch cup from 1967 with apparent fascination. He was alone, as promised. Malfoy. Potter. Malfoy turned. His expression was carefully composed, the Malfoy mask, polished and practiced, but his eyes were doing something more complicated. Thank you for coming. You've got 10 minutes. Malfoy's jaw tightened at the bluntness, but he didn't take the bait. I'll be brief, then. My father wants to know your intentions. Your father can make an appointment through Gringotts. My father is currently navigating the political fallout of having publicly supported Dumbledore for 15 years while simultaneously maintaining ties with people who privately oppose everything Dumbledore stands for. He is doing this while the entire Wizengamot is in crisis and the Goblin Nation is flexing treaty powers that haven't been used in 3 centuries. He doesn't have time for appointments. He has time for a question, passed through me, answered at your discretion. Harry studied Malfoy. The boy was 11, same as him, but he'd been raised in politics the way Harry had been raised in a cupboard, immersed since birth, shaped by it, fluent in its language. This wasn't a child's errand. This was a diplomatic overture, carefully structured to give both sides deniability. Ask your question. Are you coming for us? The simplicity of it surprised Harry. Not the political maneuvering he'd expected, just raw, honest fear, wrapped in Malfoy composure. Define us. The old families. The sacred 28. The families Dumbledore's compulsions were designed to make you distrust. My father knows about the aversion charms, the ones keyed to dark-aligned bloodlines. He knows you were programmed to hate us on sight. What he doesn't know is whether the programming took. The compulsions have been removed. I know. That's why he's asking. Because if they're gone and you still hate us, that's real, and he needs to know. Harry leaned against the trophy case and considered. Lucius Malfoy was a Death Eater, former, allegedly, under Imperius, almost certainly lying about that. He was also one of the most powerful political operators in Wizarding Britain, with deep pockets, extensive connections, and the particular ruthless intelligence of a man who'd survived the fall of Voldemort by immediately switching sides and buying his way to respectability. He was dangerous. He was also potentially useful. And the fact that he'd sent his 11-year-old son to have this conversation told Harry that Lucius was more scared than he wanted to admit. I don't hate you, Harry said. I don't hate your family. I don't have pre-programmed opinions about anyone anymore. What I have are facts, assessments, and interests. He held Malfoy's gaze. Fact, your father served Voldemort. Assessment, his Imperius defense is probably false. Interest, I don't care, because the past is only relevant to me insofar as it informs present behavior. Malfoy's composure flickered. Something like hope, quickly suppressed, crossed his face. Tell your father this, Harry continued. I am not Dumbledore. I'm not building a faction or sorting people into heroes and villains based on what house they were in or what their parents did. I am dealing with a specific crime committed against me by a specific person. That's all. If your father wants to be an ally, he can demonstrate it through actions, not declarations. If he wants to be an enemy, he should know what he's dealing with. And if he wants to stay neutral, that's fine too. But the fence is going to get uncomfortable soon, and he should decide before the trial. Malfoy was quiet for a moment. Then, very slightly, the mask dropped. Not entirely, the Malfoy training was too deep for that, but enough for Harry to see the boy underneath. Intelligent. Cautious. Carrying a weight that no 11-year-old should have to carry. For what it's worth, Malfoy said, the compulsions wouldn't have been necessary. I was planning to be a prat to you regardless. Family tradition. Harry almost laughed. I appreciate the honesty. Don't get used to it. It's terrible political strategy. Malfoy straightened, the mask sliding back into place. I'll relay your message. And Potter, the trial. My father will be watching. So will everyone else. Good. I want them to. Malfoy left. Harry stood in the trophy room among 1,000 relics of Hogwarts history and thought about power, who had it, who wanted it, who was afraid of it. Dumbledore had spent a century accumulating power through trust and reputation and carefully managed appearances. The old families had accumulated it through blood and gold and strategic marriages. The goblins had accumulated it through patience and competence and the long memory of a species that had been underestimated for 1,000 years. Harry was 11 years old and his power came from none of those things. His power came from the simple, brutal fact that someone had tried to cage him and failed, and the world was now watching to see what the uncaged thing would do. The answer was, whatever it wanted. Sunday night, Ironclaw sent a message: the inner defenses were breached. The dead man's switch had been rerouted. The sealed chamber was accessible. Harry went down at midnight. Flitwick met him at the room of requirement. The tiny professor was buzzing with barely contained energy, professional curiosity warring with professional caution in a way that made him vibrate slightly. "The team is already inside," Flitwick said as they stepped through the portal. "Ironclaw says it's," he used the word, "significant. For a goblin wardbreaker, that's roughly equivalent to a human screaming." They descended through Gringotts carved tunnels that ran beneath the castle's foundations, ancient passages that predated Hogwarts, part of the original goblin infrastructure that the founders had built upon. The air grew colder as they went deeper. The magic grew thicker, pressing against Harry's senses like fog. The sealed chamber was at the bottom of a spiral stair carved from living rock. The door, or rather, the space where the door had been, since the wardbreakers had dissolved it, opened into a room roughly 20 feet square, with a vaulted ceiling and walls of dark stone that seemed to absorb the torchlight. In the center of the room, on a pedestal of black marble, sat a mirror. It was tall, nearly ceiling height, with an ornate gold frame and an inscription across the top that Harry read without difficulty: Eris stra eru oit ube kafru oit unwosi. Reversed, "I show not your face but your heart's desire." The mirror of Erist. "Don't look into it," Harry said sharply, stopping Flitwick with a hand on his shoulder. "The mirror shows you what you want most. It's been used historically as a trap, people waste away staring at it, lost in fantasy. Dumbledore would know that. He put it here for a reason." Ironclaw was standing to one side, studying the mirror's frame with a diagnostic instrument. "Lord Potter is correct. The mirror is dangerous, but it is not what we came here for." He pointed to the base of the pedestal. "Look." Harry crouched down. Set into the marble base, barely visible, was a small compartment sealed with a ward that pulsed with a sickly green light. The ward was failing, with the siphon cut and Harry's stolen magic no longer feeding it, the protection was running on fumes. "The second siphon terminated here," Ironclaw said. "Your magic was feeding this ward. Keeping it active. Whatever is inside this compartment, Dumbledore wanted it kept under constant, powerful protection he couldn't maintain himself without drawing on your core. Open it." Ironclaw's wardbreakers worked for 10 minutes, carefully dismantling the failing protection. When the last thread of the ward dissolved, the compartment clicked open. Inside was a stone. Small, roughly the size of a fist, dark red, and thrumming with a magic so dense it made the air around it shimmer. Harry reached for it and stopped. His magic was reacting, not reaching toward the stone, but recoiling from it, the way you'd pull your hand back from a hot surface. "Don't touch it," the lead wardbreaker said. "That is not a natural object." Ironclaw moved closer, holding his diagnostic instrument over the stone. The instrument whined, flickered, and projected a reading that made every goblin in the room go very still. "The Philosopher's Stone," Ironclaw said. Silence. "The Philosopher's Stone," Flitwick repeated, his voice faint. "Nicholas Flamel's Philosopher's Stone. Here. Under Hogwarts. Dumbledore was hiding it," Harry said. "Protecting it. But why here? Flamel had it for 600 years, it was safe with him. Why move it to a school full of children?" "Because it wasn't just being hidden," Ironclaw said. He was reading the diagnostic output with increasing intensity. It was being used as an anchor. "Look, the energy pathways. The stone's natural output was being channeled into the ward matrix, supplementing the power your siphon provided. But there's a secondary function." He trailed off, working with his instrument. "There. A binding. On the stone itself. Dumbledore placed a conditional access ward on it. The stone can only be retrieved by someone who wants to find it but not use it. A moral test, Harry said. A filter. Designed to prevent anyone with selfish intentions from taking it. Which means Dumbledore anticipated that someone would come looking for it. He wanted someone to try. Harry stared at the stone. He moved it to Hogwarts knowing someone would try to steal it. He set up protections that were challenging but not impossible. And he put it in a room with a mirror that shows your heart's desire, which would trap most people who got this far. A gauntlet, Flitwick said, understanding dawning. He built a gauntlet. A series of challenges leading to the stone, designed to test whoever came after it. Designed to test me, Harry said. The cold stone in his chest was back. Think about it. First year at Hogwarts. Boy who lived. Dumbledore puts an incredibly valuable, incredibly dangerous artifact in the school, protects it with challenges that an exceptionally brave and resourceful child might, just barely, be able to overcome, and then makes sure I hear enough hints and rumors to go looking for it. You don't know that, Flitwick started. I know Dumbledore. I know what he did to my core. I know he spent a decade building a specific kind of person, brave, loyal, not too clever, not too cautious, trusting of authority. The kind of person who'd hear about a mysterious object being guarded and think, I should investigate, instead of, I should tell a teacher. The kind of person who'd rush in. Who'd be heroic. Harry's voice was flat. Controlled. He was testing me. First year. Age 11. To see if his weapon was ready. The room was very quiet. The Philosopher's Stone pulsed on its pedestal, indifferent to the revelations happening around it. The stone needs to be removed, Ironclaw said. Returned to Flamel or secured in Gringotts. It should never have been in a school. Agreed. But document everything first. Every ward, every protection, every modification Dumbledore made. I want it all in the evidence file for the trial. It will be done. Harry looked at the mirror of Eriste one more time. He could feel it pulling at him, a gentle tug at his attention, an invitation to look, to see what his heart desired most. He didn't look. Not because he was afraid of what he'd see, but because he already knew. He wanted to be free. And he already was. Let's go, he said. Monday. 1 week until the trial. The Daily Prophet had been running wall-to-wall coverage, Skeeter's articles, opinion pieces, legal analysis, an interview with the Goblin ambassador to the ICW, a 3-part series on the history of the Treaty of Carthage that Hermione had pronounced surprisingly accurate, though she simplified the 1631 revisions. Public opinion was shifting. The initial shock, Dumbledore arrested, impossible, there must be a mistake, was giving way to something more complicated as the evidence accumulated. The diagnostic reports were public. The signature match was confirmed by independent experts. Former students were coming forward with stories that, in retrospect, suggested they'd been under subtle influence. A Ravenclaw graduate who'd inexplicably changed career paths after a meeting with Dumbledore, a Slytherin who'd been expelled on thin evidence and now wondered if the headmaster had been monitoring his thoughts. Neville's case broke on Wednesday. Harry had briefed Ragnarok on the situation and left the decision about publicity to Neville, who thought about it for 2 days and then said, with the quiet determination that was becoming his new default, tell them. Tell everyone. If there are others out there who've been blocked, they need to know it's possible. The Prophet headline was smaller than Harry's but no less devastating. Second student found with illegal magical blocks, Neville Longbottom, son of Aura heroes, suppressed since childhood. The article named the 7 early childhood bindings as placed by a direct caster. Augusta Longbottom was not named, but the implication was clear to anyone who understood the timeline. The remaining bindings were attributed to the incompatible wand, which was discussed in clinical detail. Experts weighed in on the dangers of mismatched wands. Ollivander gave a rare interview in which he called the practice of forcing inherited wands magical negligence at best and abuse at worst. Augusta Longbottom arrived at Hogwarts that afternoon. Harry heard about it from Neville, who came back to the common room white-faced and shaking, but not cowering. Not anymore. He sat in the armchair by the fire and told Harry, Ron, and Hermione what had happened in McGonagall's office. She was furious, Neville said. Not at what was done to me. At the publicity. She said I'd shamed the family. She said, he stopped. Swallowed. She said my father would be disappointed. Hermione made a sound of outrage. Ron's fists clenched. What did McGonagall say? Harry asked. She told Gran that Gringotts had confirmed the 7 early bindings were placed by a family member, that the signature would be identified at the trial, and that if Gran wanted to discuss disappointment, she should start with whoever decided a Longbottom heir needed to be magically leashed before he could walk. Neville's voice was steady, though his hands weren't. Gran went quiet after that. Really quiet. Then she asked to see the diagnostic report. And McGonagall showed her. All of it. The blocks, the suppression levels, the cognitive dampening, the fear amplifiers. Gran read the whole thing without saying a word. And then Neville's voice cracked. Just slightly. She looked at me and said, I didn't know, Neville. I swear to you, I didn't know. And I believed her. About the wand. She genuinely thought she was giving me something precious. She didn't know what it was doing. And the 7 early bindings. She says she doesn't know who placed them. But she's going to Gringotts. Voluntarily. For a full investigation. Neville looked at his hands. I think she's scared, Harry. I've never seen my Gran scared before. Being scared means she's taking it seriously. She hugged me. Before she left. She never hugs me. Nobody said anything for a while. The fire crackled. Outside, rain began to tap against the windows. Neville, Hermione said softly, you're the bravest person I know. Neville looked at her with such surprise that it was almost funny. Almost. I'm not brave. Harry's the one who, Harry had goblins backing him. Resources. A plan. A political strategy. Hermione shook her head. You stood up to your own grandmother. With nothing but the truth. That's braver than anything. Ron nodded. She's right, mate. That took serious guts. Neville stared at them. Then he looked at Harry. You told me on the train, Neville said. Bravery is being afraid and doing the thing anyway. I meant it. I know. Neville straightened in his chair. The firelight caught his new wand in his belt and the cherry wood gleamed. I'm ready for the trial, Harry. Whatever you need me to do. Thursday evening. McGonagall called Harry to her office, Dumbledore's former office, which she had thoroughly degutted over the past week, removing dozens of silver instruments that the Goblin team had identified as monitoring devices. The portraits of former headmasters lined the walls, watching with painted eyes that ranged from curious to disapproving. I've completed the review you requested, McGonagall said. Student intake records, cross-referenced with family magical histories and academic performance. She pushed a folder across the desk. I found anomalies. Harry opened the folder. Inside were 12 student files, each flagged with notes in McGonagall's precise handwriting. 12 students, she said. Across all 4 houses, various years. Each one shows a pattern of academic performance significantly below what their family magical history would predict. I'm not talking about students who are simply less talented than their parents, that's normal variation. I'm talking about students whose performance is so far below baseline that, now that I know what to look for, it cannot be explained by natural ability alone. Harry scanned the names. Some he recognized from old families, a Bones, a Macmillan, a younger Weasley cousin. Others were Muggleborns. Muggleborns too. 3 of them. No family magical history to compare against, but their accidental magic reports, the incidents that triggered their Hogwarts letters, suggest power levels far above what they've demonstrated in classes. McGonagall's voice was tight. I've arranged for Gringotts to offer voluntary diagnostic scans. Madame Pomfrey is cooperating. If even half of these cases confirm blocks, Harry. It's not just me and Neville. No. It may be systemic. Harry closed the folder. He thought about what kind of person would bind 12 children, or 100 children, if the pattern extended beyond what McGonagall had found. Not just Dumbledore. The 7 early bindings on Neville were someone else's work. The incompatible wand was negligence, not malice, but the childhood bindings were deliberate. How many people were doing this? How widespread was the practice? Was it organized or opportunistic? Professor, Harry said, I want these scans done before the trial. If we can present evidence of a wider pattern, it changes the narrative. This isn't just about what Dumbledore did to me. It's about what wizarding society allows to be done to children. McGonagall looked at him with an expression that was equal parts admiration and unease, the specific discomfort of an adult realizing that the child in front of them is operating on a level she couldn't quite match. I'll arrange it, she said. Harry, the trial. Are you prepared? I've been prepared since July. That isn't what I mean. She leaned forward. I mean, are you prepared for what Dumbledore will say? He's not a fool. He's not going to sit in that chair and look pathetic. He's going to make a case, a compelling one, that everything he did was necessary. He's going to talk about Voldemort. About the prophecy. About the greater good. And some of the people listening are going to believe him, because he's spent 100 years being the most convincing man in any room. I know. You need to be better. Not angrier. Not louder. Better. Can you do that? Harry met her eyes. Green to sharp gray. Watch me. The night before the trial, Harry couldn't sleep. Not from anxiety, his occlumency kept that in check, but because his magic was restless, churning with something that felt like anticipation. He lay in bed and felt the castle around him, the slow pulse of the wards, the dreams of 1,000 sleeping students, the patient darkness of the lake, the ancient watchfulness of the forest. He got up, pulled on his robe, and went to the common room. Neville was already there. Sitting by the dying fire, his new wand in his hands, turning it over and over. He looked up when Harry came down the stairs. Couldn't sleep either, Neville said. Harry sat in the chair next to him. They didn't talk for a while. The fire cracked and settled. I keep thinking about my parents, Neville said eventually. Mum and Dad. In St. Mungo's. They don't recognize me. Mum gives me gum wrappers every time I visit, Drubble's best blowing gum. Gran throws them away. I keep them. He was quiet for a moment. If someone blocked me as a baby, if someone looked at Frank and Alice Longbottom's son and decided he needed to be less, why? What possible reason could there be? Control, Harry said. The same reason as mine. A strong Longbottom heir is an independent political force. A weak one is manageable. But who benefits from that? Dumbledore didn't do it, the signature's different. I don't know yet. The goblins will identify the caster from the signature. It takes time, but they'll find them. And when they do, then we do what we did with Dumbledore. Evidence. Law. Public accountability. No revenge. Just justice. Neville nodded slowly. He held his wand up and murmured Lumos, and the warm light filled the common room, steady and bright. I can feel my magic now, Neville said softly. All the time. Like a heartbeat. It was always there, but it was muffled, like hearing music through a wall. Now it's just, there. Mine. Clear. He looked at Harry. Is that what it's like for you? Yes. Except louder. Neville almost smiled. Yeah. I bet. They sat together until the fire went out, two boys who'd been caged and unchained, waiting for the morning. The trial was held in the deepest level of Gringotts, in a chamber that had been carved from the bedrock of London before the Romans arrived. The ceiling was lost in shadow. The walls were lined with goblin-forged steel that absorbed sound, creating an acoustic space where every word landed with weight. Tiered seating rose on three sides, the tribunal panel at the center, observers on the flanks. The fourth side was open, facing a raised platform where the accused would sit. The tribunal consisted of 5 judges, 3 goblins and 2 ICW representatives, one from the French minister and one from Makusa. Ragnarok had chosen them carefully. The goblins were senior justicars with unimpeachable records, and the human judges were selected for independence and legal expertise rather than political alignment. The observer galleries were packed. Ministry officials, Wiesengemot members, foreign dignitaries, reporters. Rita Skeeter was in the front row of the press section with a quick quotes quill that vibrated with barely contained excitement. Behind her, a wall of cameras flashed. Lucius Malfoy was there, third row, his silver blonde hair unmistakable. His face was a perfect mask, but his gray eyes moved constantly, reading the room, calculating angles. Augusta Longbottom sat ramrod straight on the opposite side, wearing a vulture-topped hat and an expression of granite severity. She looked like a woman who had recently been forced to re-evaluate everything she believed and had not enjoyed the experience. McGonagall was present. Flitwick. Sprout. Snape, standing in the shadows near the back wall like a gargoyle that had wandered in from the roof. Harry sat in the witness section with Neville, Hermione, and Ron. He wore formal robes, dark green, the Potter family crest embroidered on the breast, the head of house ring on his finger. He looked, Hermione had told him with her usual precision, like someone who is about to change the world and has scheduled it for this afternoon. The doors opened. Dumbledore entered, escorted by 4 war guards. He wore simple grey robes. The goblins had not allowed him his usual flamboyant wardrobe, whether from protocol or pointed commentary. The magic-suppressing shackles were on his wrists, dulling his signature to a fraction of its normal presence. He looked diminished, which was the point. But his eyes were the same. Blue, sharp, and as he crossed the chamber and took his seat on the accused platform, they swept the room with the particular alertness of a man who had been thinking very hard for 10 days and had arrived at a strategy. The chief justicar, an ancient goblin named Greystone, whose age was reportedly measured in centuries, struck a ceremonial gavel against a block of black marble. The sound rang through the chamber like a bell. This tribunal is convened under the authority of the Treaty of Carthage, Article 17, to hear the charges against Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. The accused is charged with 107 counts of illegal magical binding, suppression, and siphoning, 3 counts of magical assault, 21 counts of illegal mind modification, and 2 counts of magical theft. All charges relate to actions performed upon Harry James Potter, head of the most ancient and noble house of Potter. How does the accused plead? Dumbledore's legal counsel, a wizard named Elphias Doge, old and clearly out of his depth, rose. The accused pleads not guilty by reason of necessity, Your Honor. The defense will demonstrate that all actions were taken in direct response to a documented existential threat and were proportionate to the danger faced. Noted. Prosecution, you may present. Ragnarok stood. He had abandoned the war advocate dress for something more formal, a black suit, the Gringotts chain of office, no weapons. His voice, when he spoke, filled the chamber without amplification. Honored Tribunal. The facts of this case are not in dispute. The accused has, through counsel, acknowledged the actions and disputes only the justification. We will therefore be brief with evidence and thorough with context, because context is what this trial is truly about. He laid it out. Methodically, precisely, without emotion. The diagnostic reports, projected as holographic displays for the entire chamber to see. Harry's core, wrapped in 107 threads. The identification of each binding, its type, its function, its effect. The magical signature match, confirmed by 3 independent analyses. The health suppressors and their physical consequences, illustrated by medical records from the goblin healers showing Harry's condition upon first examination, malnourished, undersized, scarred, and operating at 3 to 4% of his magical capacity. The chamber was silent. Even Skeeter's quill had stopped moving. Ragnarok called Harry to the witness platform. Harry stood, crossed the chamber, and took the seat. He was aware of every eye in the room, hundreds of them, human and goblin, fixed on him with varying degrees of sympathy, curiosity, hostility, and awe. He was aware of Dumbledore watching him from the accused platform, blue eyes intent. "Lord Potter," Ragnarok said. "Please describe, in your own words, your life before the discovery of the bindings." Harry spoke. Not from the prepared testimony, he'd abandoned that this morning, choosing instead to simply tell the truth, because the truth was more devastating than any legal brief. He told them about the cupboard. The locks on the door. The meals withheld as punishment for accidental magic that he couldn't control. The hand-me-down clothes 3 sizes too large. The school where teachers had been told he was a troublemaker and treated him accordingly. The cousin who used him as a punching bag. The aunt who flinched every time she looked at him because he reminded her of the sister she'd hated. The uncle who told him, every day, that his parents were worthless drunks who died in a car crash because they were too stupid to live. He told them about the magic that leaked out despite the suppressions, the glass vanishing at the zoo, the hair that grew back overnight, the time he'd operate onto the school roof, and how every incident was punished. Locked in the cupboard. No food. Sometimes for days. He told them about the compulsions. The obedience to Dumbledore's voice that had felt like natural respect. The loyalty to the Weasleys that had felt like instant friendship. The distrust of Slytherins that had felt like instinct. The reduced curiosity that had felt like contentment. The acceptance of abuse that had felt like strength. "I thought I was coping," Harry said. His voice was steady. "I thought I was resilient." The boy who lived, surviving his difficult childhood with grace and humility. That's the story, isn't it? The one Dumbledore needed. The humble hero. The obedient weapon. He paused. "I wasn't coping. I was suppressed. The compulsions made me accept things that no child should accept. The intelligence dampeners kept me from questioning. The emotional regulators kept me from feeling the full weight of what was being done to me. I was engineered not to fight back. Not to think. Not to be anything except what Dumbledore needed me to be." He looked at Dumbledore. The old wizard met his gaze. "And the worst part," Harry said, "is that it almost worked." The chamber was very quiet. In the observer gallery, Augusta Longbottom had a handkerchief pressed to her mouth. Lucius Malfoy's mask had cracked, just slightly, a tightness around the eyes that suggested even a former Death Eater had limits to what he could hear without flinching. McGonagall was crying, silently, her spine iron straight and her face wet. In the back, Snape stood in his shadow and didn't move. But his hands, hidden in his sleeves, were clenched so tight his nails drew blood. Ragnarok presented the supplementary evidence, the Philosopher's Stone, hidden beneath Hogwarts, the gauntlet of challenges clearly designed to test a first-year student, the siphon feeding Harry's stolen magic into wards and hidden chambers. The surveillance network embedded in Hogwarts walls. The monitoring enchantments on student dormitories. The loyalty compulsions in the headmaster's office. Then he presented McGonagall's findings. 12 students with anomalous performance profiles. 4 had been scanned in the past week, all 4 showed evidence of magical suppression. The gallery erupted. Greystone's gavel came down 3 times before order was restored. 4 additional students, Ragnarok said, with confirmed bindings. Different casters. Different methods. but a consistent pattern of magical suppression targeting children from prominent families. This tribunal is concerned with Dumbledore's crimes against Lord Potter, but the broader pattern is relevant to motive. Why suppress children's magic? For the same reason Dumbledore suppressed Harry Potter's control. A generation of children, diminished, made dependent, made manageable. Whether Dumbledore acted alone or as part of a wider practice, the philosophy is the same, those with power deciding that children should have less of it. Ragnarok sat. The prosecution rested. Doge rose for the defense. He was sweating, clearly aware that his case was drowning, and his opening remarks were rambling and unfocused, references to Dumbledore's decades of service, his defeat of Grindelwald, his tireless work for the magical world. The tribunal listened politely. None of them looked convinced. Then Dumbledore spoke. "If I may address the tribunal directly," he said, and even in shackles, even diminished, his voice had that quality, the gravity, the authority, the sheer presence of a man who had been the most powerful wizard in the world for 50 years. Greystone hesitated. "Then, the accused may speak." Dumbledore stood. He looked at the tribunal, at the gallery, at Harry. And when he spoke, his voice was quiet and measured and absolutely sincere. "I am guilty," he said. The chamber went still. "I placed 107 bindings on Harry Potter. I suppressed his magic, dampened his intelligence, regulated his emotions, and siphoned his power. I left him with the Dursleys knowing they would mistreat him. I designed compulsions to shape his social relationships and prevent him from questioning his circumstances. Everything the prosecution has presented is true. I did all of it." Doge looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. "I did it," Dumbledore continued, "because on October 31, 1981, when Voldemort's killing curse rebounded and Harry Potter survived, I performed a diagnostic on the infant and discovered something that terrified me more than Voldemort himself." He paused. The chamber held its breath. A fragment of Voldemort's soul had embedded itself in Harry's scar. The reaction was immediate and violent. Gasps. Shouts. A reporter in the press section fainted. Greystone's gavel came down 4 times. "Voldemort created objects called Horcruxes," Dumbledore said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Containers for pieces of his soul, created through murder, which anchor him to life. As long as any Horcrux survives, Voldemort cannot truly die." The killing curse rebounded because Lily Potter's sacrificial protection shielded Harry, but the violence of Voldemort's soul being ripped from his body caused a fragment to latch onto the only living thing in the room. Harry became an unintentional Horcrux. Silence. "I bound Harry's magic to contain the fragment. The suppressions limited the interaction between Harry's core and the soul piece, preventing Voldemort from influencing him through the connection. The intelligence dampeners reduced Harry's legitimacy potential, which would have made the mental link stronger. The emotional regulators kept Harry's anger, which feeds the connection, under control. The siphons diverted excess magical energy away from the scar, starving the fragment." He looked at Harry. The blue eyes were bright and wet. "I did not cage you out of cruelty, Harry. I caged you because there was a piece of the darkest wizard in history living inside your head, and I did not know how to remove it without killing you." The chamber was very, very quiet. Harry stood. He didn't ask permission. He didn't look at Ragnarok or the tribunal. He stood and walked to the center of the chamber, between the prosecution and defense, and turned to face Dumbledore. The entire room shifted focus to him like iron filings aligning with a magnet. "You're telling the truth," Harry said. "About the Horcrux. I know you are, because I can feel it. It's been there my whole life, a cold spot behind my scar, a presence that isn't me. The goblins identified it during my healing. They didn't know what it was. Now I do." He let that settle. "But here's what you're not saying, Dumbledore. Here's what your necessity defense carefully avoids." Harry's voice was calm, precise, surgical. "You discovered the Horcrux in 1981. You spent 10 years studying it, containing it, building protections around it. In all that time, 10 years, with access to the greatest magical library in the world, the combined knowledge of 1,000 years of wizardry, the resources of 3 political offices and a school full of experts, did you once try to remove it? Dumbledore didn't answer. Did you consult the goblins? They have healing traditions that predate Hogwarts. Traditions specifically designed to separate foreign magical entities from a host. Did you ask? Silence. Did you consult the healers at St. Mungo's? The curse breakers at Gringotts? The unspeakables at the Department of Mysteries? Did you reach out to anyone, any expert, any specialist, any being in the entire magical world, and say, there is a piece of Voldemort's soul in this child's head, help me save him? The silence was answer enough. You didn't, Harry said. Because removing the Horcrux was never the plan. The plan was to keep it. To keep me as a container, managed and controlled, until the right moment, until Voldemort returned and I could be sent to face him. And die. He paused. Because that's the only way to destroy a Horcrux that's attached to a living host, isn't it? The host has to die. Dumbledore closed his eyes. And in that gesture, that small, devastated surrender, the truth was laid bare for every person in the chamber to see. You weren't protecting me, Harry said. You were preserving me. Like a potion ingredient. Keep the container alive, keep the container compliant, keep the container from realizing what it is, and when the time comes, point the container at the enemy and let it die. That was the plan. That was always the plan. There was no other way, Dumbledore whispered. You didn't look for another way. That's the point. You decided I had to die, and then you worked backwards from that conclusion. Every binding, every block, every compulsion, they weren't about containing the Horcrux. A strong, intelligent, well-trained Harry Potter with full access to his magic could have contained the fragment just as effectively, more effectively, probably, since a powerful core is harder to corrupt. You didn't suppress me to contain the Horcrux. You suppressed me so I wouldn't fight back when the time came to sacrifice me. The chamber erupted. Not in chaos this time, in fury. The gallery was on its feet, voices raised, faces contorted with anger and disgust. Greystone let it go for 10 seconds before bringing the gavel down. Harry turned to the tribunal. Honored judges. The defense claims necessity. I say this, there is no necessity that justifies caging a child for a decade, starving his body, shackling his mind, and grooming him for death. None. And if this tribunal allows the defense of greater good to stand, if it says that it's acceptable to enslave a child because the cause is important enough, then every child in the wizarding world is at risk. Because there will always be a cause. There will always be someone who thinks they know best. There will always be a Dumbledore, looking at a child and seeing a tool. He returned to his seat. Neville gripped his arm as he sat down, a silent, fierce gesture of solidarity that said more than words. The tribunal deliberated for 47 minutes. When they returned, Greystone's ancient face was carved from judgment itself. The tribunal finds as follows. On all charges, the accused is found guilty. The defense of necessity is rejected. The tribunal holds that the existence of a dark magical artifact within the victim does not justify the enslavement of the victim, particularly when no effort was made to seek alternative remedies. The accused demonstrated a pattern of behavior consistent not with protection but with control, manipulation, and the deliberate grooming of a minor for self-sacrifice. Greystone's black eyes fixed on Dumbledore. The sentence. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore is stripped of all titles and offices, Headmaster of Hogwarts, Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot, Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards. He is sentenced to 30 years in Gringotts secure detention, with provision for review after 15 years. His wand is forfeit. His assets are frozen pending restitution proceedings. And by order of this tribunal, the Goblin Nation is authorized to conduct a full investigation into the practice of magical binding of minors across Wizarding Britain, with treaty-level enforcement powers. The gavel fell. Final. Dumbledore sat very still. He did not protest. He did not argue. He looked at Harry one last time, and what was in his eyes was not anger or defiance or even regret. It was something more complex, the expression of a man who had truly believed he was saving the world and had just been told, by the world itself, that his methods were unforgivable. "The Horcrux," Dumbledore said quietly. "Promise me you'll deal with the Horcrux." "I'll deal with all of them," Harry said. "Every last one. But I'll do it my way. Alive." The War Guards took Dumbledore away. The chamber began to empty, noise and movement and the overwhelming sense of something monumental having shifted. Ragnarok found Harry in the corridor outside the chamber. The goblin looked tired, an unusual admission for a species that considered fatigue a personal weakness. "The Horcrux," Ragnarok said. He wasn't lying about that. "No. The goblins identified an anomalous presence in my scar during the healing sessions. They couldn't classify it. Now we know what it is. Can it be removed?" Dumbledore thought the host had to die. But Dumbledore also didn't ask the goblins. Harry looked at Ragnarok. "Can it be removed?" Ragnarok was quiet for a long moment. "There is a ritual. Old. Dangerous. It was developed during the Goblin Wars for removing cursed soul fragments from warriors who'd been struck by dark weapons. It has not been performed in 400 years. But it exists. It exists. The survival rate was approximately 70%. That's 30% better than Dumbledore's plan. Something that might have been a smile crossed Ragnarok's face. I will assemble the best healers in the nation. We will study the fragment. We will prepare. And when we are ready, we remove it. On my terms. On your terms, Lord Potter." Harry walked back through the corridor toward the portal that would return him to Hogwarts. Neville fell into step beside him, then Hermione, then Ron. The four of them walked together, not because compulsions drew them, not because a dead man's plan required it, but because they chose to. Freely. Each one changed, each one stronger, each one carrying scars and wounds and the particular hard-won clarity of people who have seen the truth and refuse to look away. They stepped through the portal and into Hogwarts. The castle greeted them, a pulse of warmth in the stones, a subtle brightening of the torches, a feeling of welcome that was vast and old and genuine. Harry put his hand against the wall. The stone was warm. "We're back," he thought. "And we're not done." He walked to the great hall. It was dinner time. The tables were full, the ceiling showed an evening sky streaked with pink and gold, and when Harry entered, every head turned. He felt it, the weight of 1,000 eyes, the questions, the fear, the hope. He sat at the Gryffindor table. Neville sat beside him. Hermione across from them. Ron next to her. Food appeared on their plates, warm and plentiful, and they ate. McGonagall stood at the staff table. She didn't make a speech. She didn't need to. She simply looked at Harry, and nodded, and sat down. At the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy raised his goblet an inch, a gesture so small that only someone looking for it would notice. Harry noticed. He didn't raise his goblet back, but he held Malfoy's gaze for a moment, and something was acknowledged between them. Not alliance. Not friendship. But the recognition that the board had changed and new games were beginning. In the back of the hall, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, Severus Snape watched Harry Potter eat dinner with his friends. The boy was talking, something that made the Granger girl laugh and the Weasley boy choke on his pumpkin juice, and Snape saw Lily in the way Harry tilted his head, in the flash of his green eyes, in the particular stubbornness of his jaw when he was making a point. Snape thought about chains. About the ones Dumbledore had put on the boy, and the ones Snape had put on himself, chains of hatred and bitterness and the endless, corrosive guilt of a man who had sold the woman he loved to a monster and spent 15 years punishing himself and everyone around him for it. The boy had survived 107 bindings. Had walked into a goblin tribunal and faced down the most powerful wizard of the age. Had stood in front of a chamber full of judges and politicians and reporters and spoken the truth without flinching. Lily's boy. Not James's. Lily's. Snape uncrossed his arms. He pushed off the wall. He walked out of the great hall, down to his dungeon, and sat at his desk with a bottle of fire whiskey he kept for emergencies and a piece of parchment. He wrote 2 words, stared at them for a long time, and then sealed the letter before he could change his mind. "I'm sorry." He sent it to Harry Potter's owl. In the great hall, the dinner continued. Students talked and laughed and argued about Quidditch and homework and whether the new acting headmistress was stricter than Dumbledore. Consensus, yes, but fairly, which was different and better. The shock of the past 2 weeks was fading into something more complex, not normalcy, because nothing would be normal again, but adaptation. The wizarding world was changing. Gringotts was investigating. The ministry was scrambling. The old order was cracking, and something new was growing in the fissures. Harry finished his dinner. He said goodnight to Hermione and Ron, clapped Neville on the shoulder, and walked to the common room. The portrait of the fat lady swung open before he reached it. The castle anticipated him now, smoothing his path, and Harry had stopped being surprised by it. In the common room, Hedwig was waiting on the back of his favorite armchair with a sealed letter in her talons. Harry took it. Recognized Snape's handwriting from the potions assignment comments. Opened it. 2 words. Harry read them 3 times. Then he folded the letter carefully, put it in his pocket, and sat down by the fire. He was 11 years old. He had a piece of Voldemort's soul in his head, a 30% chance of dying when it was removed, a wizarding world in upheaval, and a war coming that no legal verdict could prevent. He was the last Potter, the head of an ancient house, the ally of a goblin nation, and the most powerful wizard born in a millennium. He was a boy who had lived in a cupboard and been told he was nothing, and who had been unchained and discovered he was everything. He was afraid. Not of Voldemort, not of the Horcrux, not of the trial or the politics or the enemies that were surely already gathering. He was afraid of the simpler things, of trusting the wrong person again, of losing the people who'd chosen to stand with him, of the 70% survival rate that meant 3 out of 10 people didn't walk out of that ritual. But bravery, as he'd told Neville on the train, wasn't about not being afraid. Harry closed his eyes. Felt his magic, vast, warm, free, humming through every cell of his body. Felt the castle around him, ancient and patient. Felt the bonds forming, real ones, unchosen by anyone but himself. Ron's stubborn loyalty. Hermione's fierce intellect. Neville's quiet courage. McGonagall's iron determination. Flitwick's joyful brilliance. Ragnar's cold, absolute reliability. And Snape. 2 words on a piece of parchment, written by a man who had been chained by his own choices for longer than Harry had been alive. "I'm sorry." It wasn't enough. Not yet. But it was a start, and starts mattered. Harry had learned that in a goblin healing chamber, feeling the first of 100 chains fall away and realizing that freedom didn't come all at once. It came in pieces. In choices. In the slow, hard work of becoming who you were supposed to be. Voldemort was out there. Weakened, disembodied, but not gone, the Horcruxes ensured that. He would return. He would be dangerous. And when he came, he would find not the weapon Dumbledore had built, compliant, controllable, ready to die, but something else entirely. Something unchained. Harry opened his eyes. The fire was warm, the common room was quiet, and tomorrow was another day. He was ready for it.